Perfect. So it is 6:07 p.m. on August 12th. We are convening for our regular board meeting. Can I ask the district secretary to please take, actually, before we do that, let me ask the general manager if there's any housekeeping items for today.
Yes, President Akbari, and I apologize, my video is having difficulty too. So hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Quickly, good evening. On behalf of the ACWD Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome the public's participation in this board meeting. My name is Ed Stevenson. I serve as the ACWD's board general manager. Members of the public may participate in this public meeting either by using the Zoom application or by telephone. If you're participating via Zoom, generally we ask that all participants mute their microphones unless speaking. You may also be placed on mute by the district secretary. The district secretary will unmute participants at the appropriate times when the board is receiving public comments. In Zoom, you'll be able to view presentation materials as they're presented to the board. And at any time, you may submit a question or raise your hand in the Zoom app, and you'll be called upon at the appropriate time. If you are participating via telephone audio, again, we ask that you put your phone on mute. You may view the meeting agenda, staff reports, and presentation materials, which have all been posted to the district's website at www.acwd.org and follow along that way. This Zoom webinar is being recorded and will be made accessible to the public for future viewing. And again, thank you everybody for your attendance, and that completes my housekeeping remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. And we will jump into the agenda with the roll call, please.
Yes, Directors Weed. Director Weed.
Here.
Director Gunther.
Here.
Huang.
Here.
Sethi.
Here.
And Akbari.
Here. Director Huang, will you lead us in the salute to the flag, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Director Huang. Moving on to item 3, public comments. Are there any members of the public who wish to make a comment at this time?
President Akbari, may I?
Yes, Mr. Nishimura, floor is yours.
I note that the review of the Finance Committee meeting of July 20th, 2021 is on the agenda as item 6.1.3. Given the fact that the board often moves quickly past reports, I can either make my comment now or later during item 6. If the latter, please note that I would like to comment on that item.
I can take a break, or I can open up for comments. Item 6.1.3. Yes, I'd be happy to do so.
All right, thank you.
My pleasure. Are there any other members of the public who wish to make a comment? Hearing none and seeing no hands raised in the Zoom app and no questions in the chat, I will close the public comment section for today, and we'll move on to item 4, consent calendar. Are there any amendments to the consent calendar?
I'd like to have item number 5.1. I'm going to have to abstain from that item again. That's the Alvarado Niles Pipeline Improvement Project. I've been abstaining, and I do believe this is still a section that's within 1,000 feet. So I'll move that we add item 5.2 and 5.3 to the consent calendar.
Great. Roll call, please.
Oh,
sorry. There's a second. Need a second.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Director Sethi. Roll call, please.
Directors Weed.
Aye.
Gunther.
Aye.
Huang.
Aye.
Sethi.
Aye.
And Akbari.
Aye. Do we have a motion to adopt the amended consent calendar?
Also move, Director
I'll
Sethi.
second.
Directors Weed.
Aye.
Gunther.
Aye.
Huang.
Aye.
Sethi.
Aye.
and Akbari.
Aye. Wonderful. Moving on to item 5.1, resolution accepting completion of utility.
I'm sorry, I'm going to place Director Gunther into a breakout room.
Perfect. Thank you. This is item 5.1, resolution accepting completion of utility location services for the Alvarado Niles Pipeline Seismic Improvement Project. I believe Director Gunther has exited to a breakout room. So I will turn it to Mr. Stevenson for this item.
Thank you, President Akbari. And I do apologize. My camera has stopped working and I'm going to continue to work on it, but you'll have to look at my name instead for a moment. What would these meetings be without some form of technical fun? This is accepting completion of a project related to the Alvarado Niles Pipeline Replacement Project, and staff is prepared to provide a brief summary, or the board could consider staff's recommendation, which is by motion grant a time extension of 65 calendar days and adopt a resolution accepting completion of utility location services for the Alvarado Niles Pipeline Seismic Improvement Project up to 1192.
I'll make a motion to support staff recommendation on item 5.1.
I'll second.
Great.
Director Swede,
Aye.
Gunther, Huang,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
and Akbari.
Aye. And we will give Director Gunther just a moment to rejoin us. Okay, looks like we have Director Gunther with us.
I have returned.
Perfect. We will move on to item 5.4, resolution honoring Andrew J. Warren upon his retirement from district service. I will turn it to Mr. Stevenson.
And I will turn it over to our Director of Operations and Maintenance, Mr. Kurt Ahrens, after seeing Andy Warren here in the audience tonight. So, Mr. Ahrens.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Yes, Andy is here tonight, and with mixed emotions, I get to present this item. I'm hoping if I don't read it, maybe he can't retire, but we'll look at the bright side and looking forward to Andy's new adventure. So with that, Andy began his professional career at the district in April 28, 1997 as a customer account representative 1 in the customer service division. He was promoted to customer account representative 2 in April of 1999. In January of 2001, and he transferred to operations and maintenance department as an office assistant 2. He stayed in that role when he transferred to engineering department in July of 2003. And in September of 2004, he was promoted to office supervisor within the operations and maintenance department. In March of 2006, Andy was appointed the assistant board secretary. So he's been supporting the board since 2006. And 2007 was promoted to office supervisor 2, which is his current role within the operations and maintenance department. And he's been acknowledged for his excellent service, assisting both internal and external customers, utilizing a friendly professional approach and ability to resolve concerns with respect and fairness. He's been recognized many times, internally by staff and also by our community and our customers when he's helped them resolve issues. His years of experience and knowledge of the district's policies and programs have made Andy a very valuable resource to the agency and myself personally, I will admit, in the last 2 years. And as office supervisor in the operations and maintenance department, Andy has been a key member of the management team, implementing numerous programs, providing support to the entire department. While serving as the assistant board secretary, Andy supported the board, office of the general manager staff. And he's also the voice of the ACWD. So if you call our answering service and get our answering line and telephone prompts, that will be Andy's voice you're listening to. So I'm not sure who's going to take over that role, but it's going to be hard to replace Andy. He will be greatly missed by his many friends and coworkers, and me personally. He's been a great asset to myself since coming to the district, and he will be missed by many, many staff. And I'm sure the board will notice his absence as well. So with that, the recommendation tonight is by motion, adopt the resolution honoring Andrew J. Warren and expressing appreciation for his 24 years of dedicated service to the district. And we all wish you well, Andy, but don't leave yet. So.
Great, thank you, Kurt. Andy, would you like to make any comments?
Sure. Usually, this is kind of very odd for me because usually I'm in the role of I'm in the capacity of taking role and those kind of things. I really don't address the board. But President Akbari and members of the board, I've always wanted to say that. So it's with my humble, I don't know how I'm going to get through this without getting emotional, but because I've been here for so long. But I want to let you know about my sincere appreciation to all of you for the many years that we've been working collaboratively together. I actually started in 1995 as a temporary employee in the groundwater division. So I had you probably may have heard these names, Jim Engel and Stephen N, of course. They interviewed me for a data entry clerk back in the day when they called them data entry clerks, to enter all the well data off of the paper well data sheets into what was the new WMS system, which is still utilized in groundwater today. So it's kind of fun to see my name over there still, but it seems like yesterday that I was performing that job, and then of course, and as Mr. Aaron said, I got hired in customer service. So and then you heard the rest. But I would be remiss if I didn't thank some key people. Of course, Kurt, thank you so much for your support here. We've had fun for the last year and a few months that you've been here. I couldn't have done it without my other managers, Carl Stinson and Walt Wadlow, and of course, Steve Peterson. And then my team, of course, Elvia Buffy and Carla Fonseca are like family to me, and it's going to be hard to leave here without knowing I'm not coming back to see them. Excuse me, sorry. But I know that we'll always be together and we'll be still in communication. That's the best part about ACWD, is the family aspect here. I'm so sorry. I don't know if I could go on, but I just want to say thank you very much to everyone who helped me get to this point in my life. And to Gina Marcoux, who's always been a mentor to me, and not just a friend, Gina, but always there when I needed you. And I'm so sorry. I didn't know I was going to be like this. It's very difficult for me when this is the only job I've really known. And to be leaving is very difficult. And people probably ask, well, why are you leaving then? You're only going to be 50 years old. But I feel like life is too short and we need to do what we need to do. And while I gain my composure again, I want to say thank you to the board. We've shared, each of us individually have shared so many different stories, and we've talked about different things, and I've really thoroughly enjoyed our moments together. Thank you so much to everyone that brought me here and got me to this point. I will miss you dearly, as you can tell.
Oh, thank you, Andy. I think everyone on the board has sentiments that they want to share. And so I'm going to open it up for some comments, with just so much appreciation for you and all the work that you've done over the past 20 plus years. Any directors want to kick us off?
I guess I'll kick it off. Andy, I saw this item. I was like, no. Maybe we could still lock the doors on your last day and not let you out. I'll figure out something sinister. Anyway, I just want to say thank you. You know, working with you has been terrific. I pointed out to Belinda a short while ago that this was the item we were talking about. And so she also expressed her thank yous. So Andy, take care. It's been great.
Thank you.
I'm going to miss you. We're going to miss you at the parties. Unless you come back to the parties, that's always available, you know.
Thank you, Dr. Gunther. I appreciate it.
But, you know, truly, I wish you the best. And as much as I hate to see people retire, I'm happy people retire. I'm not very far away from retiring either. And, you know, one day you wake up and it's like, you know what, I need to do that. And so I wish you all the best. And thank you so much for all you've done for me. You've been here almost the whole time I have. Actually, you got me dated by a couple of years with the, oh, wait a minute, 95? Yeah, I think you still have me dated by a little bit or around the same time frame. So good luck. You're going to do great.
Thank you.
Thank you,
appreciate
Andy.
it.
Can I go next, President Akbari?
Yes, please.
Wow. So Andy, I think you represent what's so special and what's so great about Alameda County Water District is our employees' dedication to our customers, to public service. I cannot even count how many conversations I have with you when you help our customer and you express how happy you are in resolving their problems and being able to help them. You are the spirit of what's so great about ACWD and our employees, and you represent what public service should look like. To that, I will always, always be so appreciative that you represent us so well and so terrifically. On a more personal note, I will have to say there are days that perhaps my faith in humanity and in people's willingness to help out suffer some setbacks. I might not be as optimistic as I usually would be. A conversation with you, how cheerful you are and how positive you are about providing service, that definitely cheers me up and gave me more faith in how the community would work together. So on that personal note, I would like to say thank you for being that really, really bright star that just give me that lift when I needed it. And I would also like to say thank you to you and your significant other. Thank you for spending all these great evenings with us, keeping us awake, all the long, long late nights. You might have spent some early mornings with us. Thank you. That's a lot of sacrifice on your part and your significant other's part. Have a great time in your retirement. It's a new adventure. I know you two will have a great time exploring and accomplish everything you have planned. Have lots of fun. Come back to see us. And if I think locking the door would keep you stay with ACWD, I would be so there. Have a great retirement.
Thank you, Dr. Wong.
Andy, I'd like to go next. I want to say that you have been the consummate professional. You know, I've spent my career in high technology in Silicon Valley, and I've rarely come across somebody that is so professional, courteous, and always extremely helpful in guiding your board members and the rest of the folks at the Water District. And beyond that, I have always appreciated your professionalism in the boardroom too, with the public, and how well and how knowledgeable you are in guiding the board through matters and keeping a meeting running efficiently. On a side note, I have always appreciated our just general conversations about what's going on in life and the news and non-water issues. And you always have some refreshing perspective on things that I've really enjoyed. And I hope for some time to come that we can still keep you as the voice of the water district. And if not, in our gig economy right now, you might have a special new gig doing voiceovers.
You never know.
So keep up all your spirits, and I wish you success in whatever you're pursuing next.
I appreciate it, Director Sethi.
Andy, thank you for your career with ACWD. Over 230 employees, or relatively few employees that the board really gets to interface with on a regular basis.
Yes.
And it's been a delight and honor to be able to work with you and your support to our activities and concerns. I'm losing my go-to person for weekly water production reports, but hopefully they'll find one or more who can replace you in that effort. But the Water District has a long tradition and history in this community, and you have been a major contributor to that. And I really appreciate you and thank you for your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Weed.
Andy, I mean, a lot has been touched on already, but I think the one thing that really resonated with me is your positivity. I think Director Huang touched on that. I mean, you're definitely one of the most positive people I've come to know. It's infectious in many ways. And so, I mean, I really, really appreciate not just your service to the district and to the board, but just kind of the rapport that you and I have built as well over the years. It's very much appreciated. I mean, to say that you're leaving big shoes to fill is an understatement, because you're the voice of ACWD. I don't know how you replace that. But you know, your legacy is going to live on through that. And so 24 years of service to the district. Incredible. I would love to know, I mean, I know you're a big college football fan. I know we talked about that's going to be kind of a big activity in retirement. What are you looking forward to most in retirement?
Well, my husband, John, asked me the same thing the other day. And I think that just being in a totally different environment is going to be open up a whole new world of opportunities and different experiences that I didn't think I was ever going to be involved with. And so, especially as you know, President Akbari and I saw each other after he was signing some documents, and I let him know that I was moving to Texas come September 3rd, and we became season ticket holders to the University of Oklahoma Boomer Sooners football. And so during fall weekends, I will be in Norman, Oklahoma, rooting on my new team, the Oklahoma Sooners, because I went to Loney College, so I didn't go to a university like that. But it will be fun experiences.
Oh, that's super exciting.
Yeah.
That's got to be quite the environment, quite the football environment. Well, I think we have a resolution for you tonight. We don't want to leave you empty-handed. Let me open it up to the board to see if we have a motion on the table.
I would be glad to make the motion, be honored to make the motion. I'll be honored to second it. And
Andy, I just want you to know, I looked at the preseason football college rankings this morning, and Oklahoma is ranked number 3 in the preseason polls.
Yes, they are.
And state rival Oklahoma State is number 22. So you're going to be in some good competition come fall.
And now with the potential move to the SEC, it's going to be a totally different thing.
Very
Right,
fun.
and
Oh,
that's
it's
the
gonna be fun.
coaches poll, by the way.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
President Akbari, I think maybe
Yes.
members of the public there might be some members of the public that wish to address the board.
You're totally right. Let me open it up to members of staff and the public to see if anyone would like to make a comment.
Mr. President, may I?
Yes, Mr.
Hi.
Nishimura.
Yes. Andy, I won't try to trick you into staying, although others have tried, and I'm sure others will. I've had the pleasure of interacting with Andy for many, many years, mostly through his work at the board meetings. He's a truly approachable and friendly person. And through various conversations, one thing has come out very clearly to me about Andy. He truly cares about the district and its customers. When customers have questions or need assistance, Andy makes it a point to go above and beyond to make sure that the customer's needs are met. When things go wrong, such as in the recent main leak, Andy ensures that the welfare of the customer and public are ensured. In an era where too many public servants focus on personal gain and empire building, it's truly reassuring to know people such as Andy choose to serve the public. I wish you the very best in the next chapter of the adventure known as life, and hope you will find new opportunities and challenges to keep things from becoming too mundane. The district will not be the same without you, and the silent but overwhelming majority of customers who benefit from your hard work will miss you dearly. You've worked hard to get here, and now is the time to reap the rewards. Best of luck, and thank you for all the dedication you have given to the customers of the district. Remember, if you want to come back and say hi and find Dallas-Fort Worth Airport overwhelming, remember that Southwest also flies out of Love Field.
Yes.
Best of luck. Thank you.
Ken. Thank you, Ken. I appreciate you.
Any other members of the public or staff who wish to make a comment?
I would like to make a comment, President Akbari.
Yes,
I
please.
just want to thank Andy for making me feel welcome when I joined the district. He's always been my go-to person, and I'll definitely miss him. I'm going to miss you, Andy.
I'll miss you too, G, very much.
Thank you for those comments.
Chris, I would like to make a comment too, and I'm here only as a member of the public.
Yes.
Andy, I am going to miss you a lot. You said you were going to wait for me to retire. So Andy and I are only a month apart in age, so now I'm starting to get really jealous. Andy, I'll miss you. Good luck.
I'll miss you too, Chris.
Keep in touch, okay?
I will, for sure.
Thank you for those comments.
President Akbari, if I might just quickly add,
Yeah.
Ms. Pena, I hope you're not getting any ideas into item tonight. I think that would not be great for the district. And Andy, you have truly been a part of the family of ACWD, of the fabric of ACWD, and you will be greatly, greatly missed. But we're all super excited for you and your future, and we know there's a heck of a lot to look forward to, and so we wish you all the best.
And same to you, Ed, Mr. Stevenson, Mr. General Manager, who I knew as an intern here, and seeing your career fly. It's just very overwhelming and prideful that I'm able to know that you came from there and ended up as general manager. So congratulations to you as well. And I will miss my ACWD family very much.
Thank you, Andy, and I'll miss you and John walking the dog in front of the house.
Wonderful. I think we can move to the resolution unless there's anyone that I accidentally skipped over.
We had a motion and a second.
There we go. Okay, we had the motion in the second, so we'll move to roll call, please.
Director Weed,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
Steffi,
Yay.
and Acwd.
Aye. Congratulations again, Andy.
Thank you so
I
much.
said yay on purpose.
All right, that concludes item 5.4. Now we'll move on to item 5.5, resolution authorizing execution of the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Joint Exercise of Powers Agreement, appointment of a representative and alternate to the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Joint Powers Authority, and authorization of amendment number 3 to the cost share agreement for Los Vaqueros Reservoir expansion project planning. And I will turn it to Mr. Stevenson.
Thank you, President Akbari. This item really does represent a milestone for ACWD and for our region, particularly timely now in our current state of drought. Staff really wanted to present a fair amount of information tonight. We wanted to be responsible and provide the key information that the board has requested and has indicated that they need to understand about the Los Vaqueros project. And so one of the things I just wanted to emphasize is that none of the actions that are proposed by staff tonight commit the district to participate in any specific way with regard to participation in the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Expansion Project, any particular option for participation. But what we're proposing tonight really focuses on the type of involvement that the district would have moving forward, and whether we'll be participating as part of the Joint Powers Authority, and if so, who would represent the district on the Joint Powers Authority, and if we're to remain as a partner in this project, we need to ensure that we're funding our share of the planning work that's still to come. So with that said, I'll turn it over to our Director of Water Resources, Laura Heides.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great, double checking. I've got my various things going here today. All right, well, thank you for that introduction. And I think that said it well, that we've got a number of actions in front of the board today that really just look at giving us a continued seat at the table in the planning for the Los Vaqueros Reservoir expansion and continue funding for the upcoming year. So with that, I want to go ahead and launch off to the next slide, please. Great, thanks. So a quick overview of our presentation today. Our purpose is really to review the current analyses of the Los Vaqueros Reservoir expansion. We will consider joining the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Joint Powers Authority, or JPA, and also consider approval of the amendment number 3 to the cost share agreement for Los Vaqueros Reservoir expansion project planning. So those are really the 3 main things that we'll be trying to accomplish today. And our outline, we're going to give a quick overview. We'll review the finance and water resources analyses that staff has undertaken to date. And then we'll review the key provisions of the joint exercise of powers agreement and amendment number 3. So hopefully we provide a thorough overview of all the issues for the board to consider tonight. So I'm going to go over these next few slides very quickly because the board has seen them before. I know you're aware that the Los Vaqueros Reservoir is owned and operated by Contra Costa Water District. It's an off-stream system with existing storage and a phase 2 expansion up to 275,000 acre feet. There's multiple partners and benefits, uses existing shared and new facilities, and it does have a significant amount of Prop 1 funding that was awarded in 2018. and an estimated total project cost of $895 million based on the latest federal feasibility study information. So next slide, please. And this information has been presented previously to the board by Contra Costa Water District and ourselves, but I wanted to include just an overview of the preliminary cost information for the overall project. You can see by the pie graph here, there is significant state funding at $470 million anticipated, as well as federal funding, and then the local funding from the partners. And actually, I should pause here for a moment because I did mean to let the board know up front that we do have a special guest with us tonight. Ms. Marguerite Patil from Contra Costa Water District is here to assist with any detailed questions the board may have on the project. And also, I'm going to continue my presentation here momentarily, but also want to let you know that we have a joint presentation tonight. So I'll also be joined by John Wunderlich from the Finance Department and Thomas Niles from the Water Resources Department, who've done the analyses, and you'll hear from them here shortly as well. All right, next slide, please. The Los Vaqueros Reservoir timeline. This I know is of interest to the board and just is a preliminary construction schedule. I've highlighted in green 2021, so you can see where we are at now, and you can see in red, there's some dots on there for the JPA formation that's upcoming, a future final award hearing and funding agreement in the next year or so. And then you can see further out, it will take multiple years to actually construct the project. Next slide, please. And what are ACWD's interest in Los Vaqueros? We've talked about this previously, but just for review for the members of the public that may be on tonight. Location. This is a project that is adjacent to the State Water Project. It's south of the Delta, yet upstream of us here at ACWD. It provides emergency and resiliency for a Delta outage, has the potential to capture Delta surpluses, could provide more operational flexibility for us, and also may facilitate easy transfers to and from any and all of the LVE partners and sources of water. And you'll hear a little bit more about that tonight in our presentation on the water resources analysis. Next slide, please. And so with that, we're going to switch to our next section here, which is review of the finance and water resources analyses. Next slide, please. And so water resources and finance staff have analyzed the currently available data for costs and operations developed by Contra Costa Water District together with the local area partners. And all of the content in this section of the presentation reflects critical inputs that are subject to change. And I really want to emphasize that this is preliminary. You'll hear that from all of us tonight based on the best available information that we have right now. But we do acknowledge that things will be changing and we'll be refining and our analyses and sharpening our pencils as we learn more. So at this stage, the analysis really constitutes a get check and that we believe is sufficient to support a decision on whether to continue in the LVE project to participating in the planning activities moving forward. Next slide. And I think with that, we'll turn it over to Mr. Wunderlich.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Heides. So I'm going to cover the next couple of slides. And so when it comes to this type of project, I know there's a lot of interest in the question of, what exactly are we paying for if we participate? And so if we participate fully, meaning in storage and conveyance, our cost would consist of several items. One is a share of the fixed cost to build the new facilities. The second, of course, would be operating costs to use those facilities to convey water. The third item would be usage fees to compensate East Bay Mud and Contra Costa Water District for use of their existing facilities. And so just to expand on this a little bit, in order to get water to the Los Vaqueros Reservoir, we would need to utilize existing East Bay Mud and Contra Costa conveyance facilities. And of course, they should be compensated for use of their facilities, just as we would want to be compensated if other agencies were using our facilities. And so, and then there's also usage fees related to the existing reservoir. where we would pay for facilities such as the dam foundation as one prime example that benefit the expansion project. So the expansion project is built upon the existing foundation. We do not need to build a new foundation, right? And so that's clearly a benefit. And so we would have a proportional payment for that. Although relatively minor compared to the construction and operating costs, there are, of course, also administrative costs to run the JPA. It is, you know, it would become kind of its own government agency. And then one of the other items we've included in the financial analysis that'll be presented this evening is an amortization of costs that we're going to have between now and 2030 when the project would be fully operational. If the board were to decide this evening not to proceed with the project, then we would not have to spend that money between now and 2030, right? And so since those costs are a part of the decision to continue, we felt it was appropriate to consider them in the financial analysis. Contra Costa and their consultant, Clean Energy Capital, that's supporting the project, have been very helpful in developing a variety of financial models and estimates and running different scenarios for agencies. And so that's largely what we've been working off of, is the model that Clean Energy Capital has prepared. In some cases, you know, we've kind of sharpened the pencil a little bit in regard to some of the assumptions that they've made to be generally consistent with the types of assumptions we make at ACWD in regard to things like interest rates, bond financing rates, discount rates, and those types of things. All right, next slide. As Ms. Hyde has talked about, all of these financial estimates are subject to significant uncertainty, and I'd like to just cover a few of the reasons why. One is that these are preliminary estimates for the cost to construct new facilities, and that is the biggest cost of the project, of course, building those new facilities. Detailed engineers' estimates will be developed before a firm commitment is asked for. But of course, with any project, you never really know what the cost is going to be until you put it out to bid and then open up those bids. Second is that the cost allocation for the new facility still has to be developed. And that will be developed and finalized through the JPA. So if we want a seat at the table in determining those cost allocations, we need to be part of the JPA. The third point is that the methodology for usage fees is not yet finalized. We have worked extensively with Contra Costa and East Bay Mud on their proposed fees, and I believe we've made significant progress, but it's not complete yet. And those will be completed as part of the service agreement package. And then, of course, there's always the potential for us or other partners to change their participation. And depending on cost allocation methodologies, a change in participation by one of the partner agencies could affect the cost of our participation. And so depending on how all those things work together, it's possible that, you know, say a year from now, when we're ready to talk about service agreements, that we have an updated financial presentation that suggests the costs are more beneficial for ACWD. And it could very easily go in the other direction, where it could be, it could look like less good of a deal for ACWD. And so, you know, that's kind of the situation we find ourselves in tonight, where we feel like we have enough information to make a decision about participating in the JPA, but obviously we'll need to learn more and have some of these things finalized before we could really talk about a firm and final commitment to the project. And so with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Nizer, who's going to talk to us about the water resources analysis.
Thank you, John. Good evening. So we're going to tap into some information that this board heard back in 2019. We did some IRP light workshops, we called it. And a lot of that was geared towards this evening. So I'm going to make some reference back to that evening, and feel free to ask questions about that if they come up. So the question is, how do we analyze this project? It's not a classic case of where we have a defined problem and we're looking for a solution. This is an opportunity being presented to us. It has a lot of interesting elements to it. And we have to look at it as exactly that, an opportunity for ACWD. And the real complexity is how do we take this concept and fit it into an already existing very complex portfolio that's quite well developed. I mean, the district's water supply portfolio is very mature, and as such is set in many ways. And will this complement our facilities and our existing assets? So what we'll hit on tonight is a few things. One, we'll have to revisit what the future looks like without LVE. The board heard some of this during our recent urban water management plan update, but we have some updates to what the future looks like, reflecting updated water supply reliability, demand numbers, and a few other assumptions there. And we're also going to look at adding the Los Vaqueros Reservoir into that portfolio and see what it looks like. And as a third item, and this was not included in committee last month, but was requested, is to also look at what we're calling the LVE conveyance only option, which I'll explain in just a moment. In order to do these analyses, we developed computer models, as we always do, but those computer models are also used a lot for helping qualitative analyses. And I'm going to rely a lot on sort of qualitative narrative discussion to explain these benefits this evening, touching on the numbers, of course. But we're really in an opportune time to think about the qualitative benefits of this project right now in 2021. In the situation we're in a second critically dry year. All indication is that we're headed into a third dry year. And I want the board and members of the public to think about what this would look like if this facility existed today. We know how we would be using it today, and we know what sort of benefits it would give us. And so that's a really valuable thing. It's hard for a computer to spit that out. It's very tangible when we think about the very dire situation the state of California is in with water supply right now and the prospect of a very critical 2022. So of course, we're going to review just sort of the standard metrics that we use, the reliability performance of a concept, the costs, water quality, risk, environmental impacts are wrapped into risk. But from that IRP workshop, we presented to the board the need to expand our policy, planning policy criteria to include a few things, and the board unanimously and very wisely agreed to include adaptability for climate change, resiliency, as well as future flexibility. I think we called it future flex. But looking at the future of where water's going in California, does this project make more sense tomorrow than it maybe does today? Next slide, please. So I'd like to just start by discussing the conveyance only option that was requested. So it's important to point out a few things about conveyance only. Los Vaqueros partners, Contra Costa Water District is leading the studies. There is an opportunity to participate in this project as a conveyance only project member. So not having a storage component in the expanded reservoir. So it's just having access to, as Mr. Wunderlich pointed out, the existing conveyance infrastructure that CCWD and East Bay Mud have, as well as the new Transfer Bethany pipeline. So it's a handful of pipes, not just the one new one. And it does some positive things. It provides an alternative way to move water through the Delta. And when combined with East Bay Mud's facilities, it would provide an opportunity to move water completely around the Delta if the Delta were severely impacted, such as after an earthquake. It may have some additional operational benefits as well. A few important things to understand. One, Contra Costa Water District is not proposing to not build storage. So I want to be perfectly clear about that. That is not the discussion. The discussion is if ACWD does join the JPA and moves forward with this program, do we want to be invested in storage or just this conveyance facility? And it's also important to understand that all that grant funding that was presented by Ms. Heides earlier really applies to the total project. It can't be split out. It's the whole project is storage plus conveyance. And if it's also helpful, I forget how many members are in the LAP right now, but the only people who are looking at conveyance only right now are specifically CVP contractors and are also ag agencies. And that may be a little bit telling. Next slide, please. So revisiting from the earlier slide this evening, what are our interests? What are ACWD's interests in Los Vaqueros? As we laid out early on, we're looking at the ability to have some emergency storage in the south end of the Delta that's available if the Delta is disrupted, either through droughts, regulatory issues, earthquake, flooding. We also have the ability to capture surplus water, Los Vaqueros. That's one of the promises of this concept. And it also provides us operational flexibility, and it opens up the opportunity to work with a bunch of other regional partners so that we could facilitate transfers, which is going to be the direction of California Water. If we look at these two concepts, we'll just refer to LVE as being the complete project, and then one that's just conveyance only. If you look down the list, the things that we're interested in the full project are not quite as rosy with the conveyance only. And this is an important part to point out, is the surpluses in particular. And we want to hang out on this because it's a really pivotal part of the value of this reservoir for us. If you'll notice, the potential to capture delta surpluses for an LVE conveyance only project is no. Right now, that is not an envisioned benefit. And to explain that, next slide, please. It's helpful to understand what a delta surplus really is. And this simplified graphic, overly simplified, but gets 99% of the content through. On our balanced condition is where the delta is operating in a balanced condition. We have two giant projects. We have the federal project, the state project, and then numerous other parties. In a balanced condition, as depicted on the left, the inflows into the delta are just offsetting the delta flow needs, as well as the request for water, the pumping out of the delta. And that's what's generally referred to as a balanced condition. Those inflows include releases from reservoirs. Now, when we get into a surplus condition on the panel to the right, that's when we have a scheduled delivery of water being taken out of the delta. The delta has flow criteria that are being met. And all of a sudden, maybe for a span of a few days, there's more water coming into the delta. And when that condition exists, the state and federal entities working together sort of will declare that there's a surplus condition, and that allows certain water rights, surplus water rights, to be enacted. So what does that mean? Well, to take that surplus water, effectively, it means you can't change your use of scheduled water. As we mentioned, in a balanced condition, the water we're taking, the pumping out of the delta, that's the baseline for determining when surplus. So that's fixed. Effectively, if you want to capture surplus, the easiest way to do that is to have two things. It's to have a place to store it and conveyance to get water into it. ACWD has very limited opportunities to take advantage of these surpluses today. You may ask, why not semi-tropic? We used to put Article 21 water down in semi-tropic. What's happened today is we no longer have, we never had exclusive access to convey water to semi-tropic. And under today's conditions, when there are surpluses, the folks who own the capacity to move water to semi-tropic are just exercising the surpluses for themselves, as they have every right to do, and we would do if we were in their position. So ACWD's storage operation right now does not have the ability to take advantage of these surpluses. Next slide, please. So what surpluses are we talking about? And this is pretty important to focus on here. The first one is this Article 21 water, and the board's heard this many times. And what this is surplus water on the state water project. And we, in our analysis that you're going to hear here tonight, or are hearing, is focused on the availability of Article 21 water and our ability to capture that water if we are participating in Los Vaqueros. This is a very safe planning assumption for us. The availability of that data in our planning models that we use is published by the state of California. It's consistent with everything we do in our own planning. We have right to it as a state contractor, as long as we have a conveyance and storage place to put it. So this is not a risk. The only thing that's uncertain at this point is the all but remaining element of getting Los Vaqueros added to the state water project for delivery of water and the place of use. And that's not really considered to be an uncertain step. So our analyses that you're going to see here are counting on highly reliable surplus water that we have the right to. An additional benefit that we're not factoring in tonight is that Contra Costa Water District's LV water right is a surplus water right as well. That water will also be available. Now, similar to Article 21, that water has to be captured and stored before it can be delivered. So a conveyance only project can't take advantage of that water. And I should step back and say the conveyance only transfer Bethany, we can't convey that water all the way to semi-tropic. We can only get it to banks to the south of the delta. We can't get it all the way down to our bank down there. The CCWD LD water right cannot be a beneficial thing for ACWD because it needs to be stored before it can be delivered. It's 30 days, but it has to be stored. So we're not factoring that in. It's an added benefit that you can qualitatively add on top of the results you hear tonight. Next slide, please. Great. So before I'm going to hang out here and just discuss qualitatively what we're seeing with the models a fair amount, and then I'll just sort of give you the results. The future operation without Los Vaqueros. So this is sort of our 2020 urban plan that was just published. A few things have changed since then. One is that our Plan Bay Area 2050 development numbers were finalized. It came down a little bit. So that's beneficial for us. So our build out demand has come down a small increment, and that helps in the long term when it comes to saving water into semi-tropic. But we've also done a little bit of revisiting that modeling to optimize the scenario. And this is what I want to focus on here. It's a little complex to think, 30, 40 years into the future, but the future we're looking at is a substantial reduction in state water project water. And the board's heard this. We haven't even factored in losses due to the Bay Delta Water Quality Plan yet. And even with this, we're down at around 50 to 45% average delivery. So in our future, in order to operate our system, we're basically going to be prioritizing the use of our San Francisco supply in a way we don't today. San Francisco water is what we call take or pay or use it or lose it water. Every year we get an allocation. If we don't use it, it reverts to the system. Whereas our state water, if we don't use it, we can put it in our own groundwater basin or we can put it in semi-tropic. In this future operation, in order for us to have water on hand for droughts, we're seeing that in normal years, we are really going to have to crank up our every year purchases of San Francisco supplies that we have access to. And that will allow us to bank enough supply in semi-tropic so that when we have that drought, we have enough to bring back to our service district. It's a really important point because you'll see the results as they trickle through the analysis. When we look at a future with Los Vaqueros, qualitatively, we could say it's as simple as this. Those incremental benefits that we see from the surplus water that's available basically help offset the lost water supply from our state water project. It allows us to operate a little bit more the way we like to operate, the way we've built our system to operate. It allows us to make better use of our existing assets and infrastructure, semi-tropic bank. One thing that I'd like to point out is that this future scenario, as the board has heard me say in the past, when we're going to invest in Delta reliability, that assumes treatment plant number 1 gets brought back online. If you're going to invest in that supply, we need the ability to use it. So the scenario with Los Vaqueros includes the amortization costs to bring TP1 back on, as well as those operating costs. And the last option, LDE conveyance only, it's largely the same as our current infrastructure. It doesn't bring any new water supply. And all it really does is provide operational scenarios to address kind of, I call them hiccups in the Delta, whether there's a regulatory problem or problem conveying water, but we don't really have that modeled. And so it's kind of hard to reflect the benefit from that. It really is just kind of an insurance policy that would maybe stand out if we were to do a disaster analysis, but the district doesn't have a water supply assumption to go along with that. It's an analysis we just don't have for that scenario. Next slide, please. So if we look through the results, qualitatively, when we look at a future with, and I apologize that the axes have changed here, we're going across in the columns now. When we look at a future without Los Vaqueros Reservoir, we see shortages in single years of 10 to 15% with our new optimized data set. It's not hitting our 10% criteria, but the board has expressed a willingness to consider up to 20%. So it's not terrible. When we add Los Vaqueros in, we see a real enhancement. As I mentioned, a year like this, and this is now a qualitative assessment, in a year like this, 2021, we know that if we had this facility, we would have brought the additional semi-tropic water and parked it in there, just as we did with San Luis Reservoir this year. I would venture to say, here we are in August of this critical drought, and we would probably have 10,000 acre feet sitting north of us that can be gravity delivered to the South Bay pumping plant and brought to ACWD to supplement Lake Del Val in a critical, potentially critical 2022. undeniably, would be a much, I would be breathing better and sleeping better at night if that was the case. When we look at an LVE conveyance only scenario in these droughts, we don't see an enhancement reliability. It's not a water supply, it's just conveyance. When we step down and discuss resilience, and now that's the ability to operate after critical disaster in the Delta, earthquake, flooding, substantial levee failures, things that are going to be worse with sea level rise. Our future, we're very vulnerable to the Delta's weaknesses. Now, when we look at the scenario with Los Vaqueros, we have the addition of reliable storage close by that is protected from those things, as well as the ability to tap into additional resources, potentially with our partners in that reservoir. We also have the ability, potentially together with the Freeport facility, to deliver water, table A water from the Sacramento River, even if the Delta is not available for conveyance. So there's a lot of enhancements to our reliability, or resiliency rather, in preparing for a Delta outage scenario with the LVE project as envisioned. When we look at the conveyance only option, we do see the benefits of that conveyance, but it lacks that storage, which is the conveyance only does shine here in this scenario a little bit, but not as well as if you also have the storage to complement it. So resiliency is a positive for both of the two options. Another qualitative thing we look at is existing assets. This future where we're losing our state water project, this board has pursued state water since the 1960s. We started building surface water treatment plants in the 70s. Our distribution system is built radiating away from those facilities. We need water at those facilities. Alternatively, if we want to use our other supplies to serve the zones normally served by TP1 and TP2, we need to improve our distribution system. We need new pumping, we need new storage, potentially new pipelines that we're not factoring in. So without having sufficient water to meet TP1 and TP2 production rates, we're not really taking advantage of our existing assets. We're also not using our 70 CFS of capacity in the South Bay Aqueduct. And as you'll see in a future slide, our semi-tropic bank gets near depleted and then never really recovers to a very healthy level. So all those past investments, they lose value. When we add LVE, as I had mentioned earlier, it sort of gets us back to how we used to operate and how our system's been designed. So it actually helps benefit our system. And part of the cost benefit analysis we're seeing is that additional Delta supply in LV kind of leverages past investments, our existing assets, and brings added value out of those in the future that's otherwise going to get stranded. And so when we talk about, well, what's the cost per acre foot of LVE, it's really helpful to look at this integrated operation. Finally, the Los Vaqueros only, conveyance only option. It's basically the same as our existing future. We just don't have state supplies. So it's kind of no improvement in this case. Next slide, please. And then there's a few other elements which we discussed in the IRP workshops of the sort of other operational elements. I'm sorry, this is getting more towards the infrastructure. Without LVE, as I mentioned, our distribution system is going to need a lot of money, a lot of investment, which we haven't really looked at because this is still an evolving future. But if we don't have the ability to run TP2 and or TP1, we will need to spend a lot of money that we're currently not planning on enhancing our distribution system to accommodate more use of groundwater in San Francisco, and that's not cheap. We don't have firm numbers for that, but we have some placeholders that we'll throw out. If we have LVE and we bring TP1 back in, it basically plugs right back in and allows our upper zones to operate the way they've always operated, the way they were designed. They're not perfect. I saw Chris Pena's on the phone earlier. I hope she's not, her head isn't spinning. I know we need improvements to the upper zones, but with TP1 reliable production in those upper zones, the system works a lot better. And under the conveyance only scenario, there's sort of no improvement. And then this one interesting thing that came out, Devin Becker did this modeling, and one thing we looked at the end was this distribution system water quality. A future without Los Vaqueros, I mentioned we're purchasing San Francisco water pretty much full contract every year. And what we see now is our system kind of looks water quality wise like it did before 1995, where the southern end of our system was pretty much pure San Francisco and the northern end was blended water. We have this inequity in water quality that the district has spent a tremendous amount of time. It was scoped in the 1995 IRP as being a goal to achieve more parity in water quality. We step away from that, and quite significantly. So that was definitely a thing that we weren't thinking about that popped out from the analysis. And you see no improvement, obviously, with the conveyance only option. But with building Los Vaqueros, again, having TP1 online, it gets us a little bit closer to how we prefer to operate. But we're still going to see some sacrifice in this area. Next slide, please. Highlighting semi-tropic storage. As I mentioned earlier, this graphic shows our sort of planning hydrology 80 years. Sort of the upper end numbers are the maximum storage in semi-tropic, and it goes down to zero storage. That purple line represents what our future looks like without the Los Vaqueros project, and the red is with the Los Vaqueros. You can see in that red line over these periods, and this scenarios, this is what we expect from semi-tropic. We expect to fill it, we expect to deplete it during a 5 to 10 year dry period, and then refill it when surpluses are available. And in that purple line, you can see we never completely bottom out of water, but we have much healthier reserves that are available on that red line. And that means one of two things. Either we feel more comfortable that we have more water in reserves, or with the future evolution and the water management tools, opportunities to sell surpluses available that would be banked in semi-tropic. So there's a few different ways you can look at this graphic here. Needless to say, more water in a critically dry period is going to be beneficial. And we see a lot of that with the Los Vaqueros scenario. Next slide, please. This is that annualized use of San Francisco supply. The board knows we use most of it right now for blending with groundwater for water quality, but also for the water supply component. And this chart shows in blue what's used typically for blending and what's used for supplementing production or water supply in red. And for reference, we have the current day usage, which is mostly blue, and then we use a little bit from time to time to make up if treatment plants are offline, or during a drought, if it's a water supply, we're going to need just to take it because maybe state water is not available. Moving to a future without Los Vaqueros, the second stacked bar here, you can see a tremendous amount of time. We basically have our direct takeoffs just open year round. So we're using a lot of water directly into our distribution system. Doesn't mean we couldn't build new projects and envision new ways to use this supply, but these are the tools we have right now. By bringing Los Vaqueros online, we can substantially bring down that cost. You see, we still need a lot of additional San Francisco supply, but it gets us a little bit back more towards where we like to operate. And I should say for both the conveyance only and the storage option, the ability to purchase transfers and water markets should help with that, but that's an uncertainty. It's a roll of the dice to count on those. Next slide, please. When we aggregate all this, and this probably should have showed up at the top, the first line here, the first row of water supply benefit, the benefit water supply wise on an average year over a full 80 years, wet years, dry years of the surpluses is about 1,600 acre feet a year. That's not including the additional water that we may get from Contra Costa Water District surplus water right. So the amount of water we're talking about is on average 1,600 acre feet per year. The reality is it's more like 0 in some years and 8,000 in others, but it averages out to this number. When we look at the costs, the project only, the numbers we were provided by Mr. Wunderlich and his team are $3.3 million per year annualized cost estimate today for participating in Los Vaqueros Reservoir. And looking at the conveyance only, very dependent on if you have water to move through it. It ranges from about 0.7 to about $2 million a year. We just took the middle of the range, 1.4 million, but you'll see our analysis isn't really sensitive to this number. The next line down reflects the project cost plus operations. So what's built into that are our variable operating costs. Those include water purchases, power, chemicals, sediment handling. No labor, just those variable operating costs that we use for our optimization. You can see this future without LVE is quite high. We're looking at about $55 million a year, maybe 57. That depends on assumptions about what's needed for supplemental improvements to the distribution system, but it's primarily driven by the fact that we're buying that full San Francisco contract in almost every year, even if it's raining buckets. The future with LVE, you can see our overall operating costs, including capitalization for the project's estimated at less than 52 million. And that's because we're saving a lot of money on San Francisco purchases. We're also able to leverage our semi-tropic and that new storage on occasion to bring back to help offset San Francisco purchases. And we don't have to make some other improvements to our distribution system that are necessary to supplement the loss of TP1. And then finally, the LVE conveyance only is basically our baseline cost plus the cost to capitalize the LVE conveyance only or pipeline. We have some additional benefits which are not costed in here about future flexibility to transfer water. These are benefits. We don't have dollars associated with them. As you can see, these costs are suggesting that the future with LVE appears to make financial sense just at the pocketbook level. But these other benefits will further bring those costs down amongst other things. And then as mentioned from our workshop, we have the climate ready element too. One of the really cool things about this project is it's independent of the state. It's sitting right in the Delta. It has new pumps that the state's not operating. So when there are surpluses, these smaller pumps are able to turn on. They're 1/10 of the size of the state pumps. So they can turn on under slow and low conditions or when there's plenty of water. They can operate more quickly and grab that surplus. But one thing we expect with climate change, and this is not reflected in our data from the state yet, is that we are going to have less snowpack. Precipitation that falls in California is going to more frequently fall as rain and not snow. And that means the Delta is going to see more spikes coming through. And that means the frequency of surpluses is going to be higher. We're going to see more spikes, or it's predictable that we will see more spikes. And as well as in greater magnitude. So the ability to be involved in a project has the ability to take advantage of that, has a certain climate ready element that we don't have right now. Not to mention the sea level rise threat to the Delta is somewhat mitigated by having this insurance of some storage and conveyance at the Los Vaqueros Reservoir. Next slide, please. So the conclusion of our analysis, while everything is fairly preliminary, is that the LVE storage and conveyance results in appears to result in a future cost savings for the district. So it actually appears to be a worthwhile financial consideration, but it does a lot of other intangible things that we haven't even put dollars on. It improves our offsite reserves in semi-tropic. It provides that insurance in case of a Delta outage. It provides new optimization abilities, as well as this flexibility to operate our semi-tropic operation ahead of when we need it, which is a winning formula. We already know that works well. And it opens up new partnering opportunities with other agencies. And there is the opening of big value, in my opinion, for the district. The opportunity to get involved in partnering and sharing, similar to what we're looking at through the BAR program. That's uncharted territory, and I think that's really where the real value and the untapped potential for this concept is really going to shine in the future, but it's speculation on my part. None of these benefits, which I mentioned, would be had if we went with the LVE conveyance only option. And so our conclusion is that at this point, the LVE appears to remain a good investment for ACWD, and it's worth continued participation in the JPA formation. And with that, I will hand it back to Ms. Heides.
Maybe I can recommend us taking a quick break for any questions, if that's okay.
Wonderful, thank you.
Let me first open it to the board to see if there's any questions or comments from the board so far.
I would like to kick it off with a few questions here, if I may.
Yeah, Director Seppi.
Okay. Could we go back a few slides? I think it was slide 16. That I first wanted to look at. Okay, on TP1, you said you had factored those new capital CIP costs into the other slide you have later on.
Correct.
How much, what dollar amount were you factoring in there?
We actually had that detail in the previous slides. We took it out. The number we use is $40 million, and I forget what the annual amortization works out to.
Okay, that's about what I've heard before. So the difference between 40 million and let's say 55 million is the capitalized cost for our investment in LVE.
I'd have to hand that over to Mr. Wunderlich.
So I think what we have is on the slide that shows the dollars is we have our estimated costs for the specific to the LVE project. And then it's going to be those costs plus the amortization of TP1 improvements that get factored into the kind of the total operations costs.
Okay, that's what I was trying to clarify, because what I thought I heard from Mr. Nizer was that that later slide included the TP1 costs. So we've got two distinct costs here, the 50 million or so for LVE plus another 40 million for TP1.
Yeah, and I think that when it comes to the LVE costs, with the way the modeling has been working with Clean Energy Capital, the consultant that's supporting the partners on the project, is a lot of it's really focused on annual costs and then comparing that to the expected average annual benefits from the project. So I get where you're going with kind of that 50-ish million, you know, kind of net present value of LVE participation, but we as staff have not specifically estimated that as like a one-time equivalent cost.
What I would like for our future presentations for the public is that we clarify what the total project costs are here between LVE and upgrading TP1. And that may not occur for some years to come here. So in my mind, what we're really considering at the table right now is $100 million investment between TP1 and the improvements, the new LVE project. So thank you for the clarification there. I also want to ask another question related to this slide. The Transfer Bethany pipeline, from the documents that were provided, has a maximum delivery of 300 CFS, and operationally it will be really between 150 to 250. Can we transfer enough water through the pipeline to do the production on 8 MGD per day? Is that even conceivable, since we're going to be sharing that transfer pipeline with two other South Bay contractors and other people down south, perhaps?
So the modeling for how that water gets delivered is a little, it's not that specific, nor is it today. The water that comes in the South Bay Aqueduct is going to be coming from multiple locations. In the case of the benefit where we have the capture of water, it's almost a matter of convenience as to when we would use the pipeline, frankly. It's really more about capturing the water and holding it, and then evacuating it from storage as quickly as possible so that we can capture more surpluses. But that pipe is not a constraint. We're not 100% reliant on it. But I think in the emergency scenario, I think we're talking about 16% of that total capacity. So that is 45 CFS. That's more than enough. Like in an emergency scenario, if we had that 16% sort of available to us, if the Delta was completely out of commission, that's plenty for running our treatment plants.
Mm-hmm. I have a question that may be best directed at our guests from Contra Costa, but what were the design considerations in determining that 300 CFS for a pipeline was the best solution? Is there any opportunity to actually increase the diameter of that pipe so that it can handle more transfer of water?
And that's a great question. If Ms. Patil is on, I would see if she's got any insight as to the design of that pipeline.
Sure. Thank you and good evening, everyone. Marguerite Batil with Contra Costa Water District for any members of the public I haven't had a chance to meet. So this has been an analysis over many, many years to look at lots of different sizes of the Transfer Bethany pipeline. We've also looked at different locations where the water would be delivered, gone through value planning, value engineering, all of that. And what 300 CFS, why we landed on that number is it was the most cost-effective size for the range of operations that we're anticipating. So I know you can imagine, Director Sethi, that you can always build a bigger pipeline, but it's expensive. It's very proportional sized cost. And it has additional permitting and other constraints that you run into when you get to be too big. And so we had to look at the full range of analysis, look at different sizes to find out what was really the most cost-effective size. So that's how we got to this stage. It was the best pairing, if you will, 300 CFS Transfer Bethany pipeline with a 275,000 acre foot reservoir. We've looked at larger sizes, but they were a better fit for like a larger reservoir or vice versa, smaller reservoir, smaller pipeline. So at this stage, because we already have a final environmental document that's been approved and a final feasibility report and a final project description with the state, we don't anticipate that we would make a modification to that because permitting is already well underway based on that size pipeline. But yeah, absolutely, folks have asked that question before. We share our analysis with them so they can see why we landed at the size that we did. Probably too much detail, but that's a little bit of background.
Thank you for the background there. That's helpful. And then I have two other points which I drafted in a memo to the staff earlier today, where I would request in the future we have a little bit more granular insight as to what is going on here. The first is on all of the LAPs and their participation level in the project, how much water is being planned for storage for each one of the participants, and how much is going to environmental benefits of the newly added 115 total acre feet of water. I'd really like to have a better understanding of how this is all split out by participants and even some of the non-committed maybes that are out there. And of the additional storage, what is really usable for the water districts and other irrigation districts, et cetera, versus what is going for environmental benefits. I know it's in some of the documents I've seen before, but I'd like to have like one table that shows all of this. And then as an encouragement to the finance team, because I've seen some documents from Valley Water District related to this, I think we need a really a much better return on investment analysis that we can present to the community. And it's not clear to me right now, except subjectively, what that return on investment over decades is for the district. And I suggested doing a return on investment analysis that carries us from the early 2030s when this dam is completed all the way through the end of the century, so that we have some solid information that we can present to the community. And I feel that is lacking right now. I'll leave that for my questions and comments for now.
If I could follow up quickly on Director Sethi's first question. We have in our CIP a $98 million line item for Los Vaqueros LPE. Did that also include TP1, or is TP1 yet another $50 million on top of the $98 million?
Yes, so the
TP1 is in the CIP as a separate line item.
So the total is $150 million, not in this case.
Well, TP1, we should, before we go too far on conflating this, TP1 is not solely dependent on having Los Vaqueros Reservoir. Arguably, we need TP1 today, and in a year like now, we'd be actually saving a tremendous amount of money on San Francisco purchases. So TP1 is scheduled to come online, I believe, by 2032, and has very near-term benefits and justifications all on its own. I was just including it because in the past, we had no solid plans for TP1, and so we're largely just being consistent with the previous presentations that the board's received under the business case.
Okay, I'm just getting a clarification. The CIP is $100 million for LVE without TP1. The next, we not mentioned in this, but in previous, that we were looking at a 9,000 acre foot participation in LV3. And yet we're only looking at 1,600 acre feet of water that we'd be receiving. Is 9,000 not excessive to our needs?
So what 9,000 does is it captures that surplus, because those plugs of water, we know the expression, when it rains, it pours. And a lot of the times when the surpluses exist, that's exactly the case. And the state of California has made it very clear, if you've got a bucket to put the water in, you can get that water. And so 9,000 is the number we've been working with. It could potentially be further optimized either up or down, but it's really about how much we can capture at once. And then really what we're doing is we're sending it down to Semi-Tropic in most of our modeling. It's just taking advantage of the surplus when they exist. It's the big gulp when there is that surplus. The other part of that is pre-staging water back from Semi-Tropic during dry periods, like a year like now. We would have 10,000 acre feet of Semi-Tropic water staged in there. And that's a good number for ACWD when combined with our emergency storage in Los Vaqueros. So it's a number we've worked at. When the district first heard, we were looking at 30,000 acre feet. And we've also toyed with going down to 5. And I think in the coming phase, we may further refine the size, but so far, 10,000 acre feet seems to be about a good workable number with the parameters of this project.
Although Contra Costa is building the storage, that was a requirement of the funding mechanism of Prop 1 money, the 470 million, plus potentially a little more later this year. But is it not true Contra Costa plans to take no percentage in the LV3? There'll be a 0 participant. San Francisco is looking at 40,000 acre feet and others, but Contra Costa, who hosts this project, will not be a participant in the storage in LV3.
Yeah, that's correct.
Right.
Yeah, that's correct.
Marguerite.
If I could jump in, our district is not planning to participate in investing in additional storage. Our plan is to hold on to our 160,000 existing acre feet. However, we are planning on investing in some of the conveyance facility improvements. So I'm referring to something we call the Neroli High-Lift Pump Station, the transfer pump station improvements, as well as the local share of the recreation enhancement of the facility. So we do have a portion of a cost that have been allocated to our district for conveyance.
Okay. Next, under the agreements of Prop 1, there was an understanding, I believe, of a 40% public benefit, so that the utility and capacity of the conveyance in particular is compromised by the requirement that much of that water be dedicated to environmental uses at no cost to the user, which primarily is grasslands. Is that a fair statement?
So we've allocated some capacity to the environmental benefit for South of Delta Wildlife Refuge. That's one of 4 state public benefits that we qualified for. So that's been accounted for in the modeling and how we project, how water moves to the various partners. So that is relying on a state investment as well as federal investment to pay for those costs.
Right. But and next, I'm grateful that we're finally talking about a conveyance only option. When this first came up, I kept asking that question and got a blank look. And it was even under the impression of much of our staff that we did not have the option. We do now. when we look at storage, we have 7,500 acre feet of water storage rights. Much like I have water rights at Del Val. If you plugged in the Del Val and LVE, that's already built and plumbed, and we have it. We're not using it. Have not executed the administrative changes with DWR to allow us to execute those water rights. That's immediate and nominal, almost no cost.
Sorry, which water rights are you referring to? We actively use our Del Val water rights in our Del Val storage, which can only store Arroyo Val water right water. We use that every year.
That is where
That's the only water we're allowed to store in that reservoir.
That would be an administrative change with DWR. It's not a written in script. I believe we should be working to modify that agreement before we invest let's say half of the project, $50 million in this additional storage. And unfortunately, we've not pursued it. Next, in our models, you showed a difference of semi-tropic. My understanding is you assumed that we could not put water in San Luis because once every 20 years or so, it overflows and you have spillage. That I found to be an absurd criteria in the model that you developed that was presented to the committee in their presentation.
That was not presented, and that's not correct. We actually do model San Luis, and we have active formulas for storing water in there that are pretty representative of how we operate today. The only time we don't put water in there is in a surplus condition, because that's when it's a threat of spilling. Well, but we actively model that in our baseline.
It was noted that in developing the semi-tropic graph, that gap, that no credit was given for storage at San Luis because of that occasionally spilled. That was a clear statement at that committee meeting.
That was a misstatement if that's the case. I was not there though.
As I look at this, and I look at the bigger picture, we have it's a two-phase portion project. The conveyance will be basically completed before the storage unit is done. The conveyance is relatively risk-free. We know the conveyance. We have little idea what how much higher risk and what the costs are. We saw that at Pacheco and other dams that are being built. I would encourage us, if we can at any time, to have a bifurcated program for a funding mechanism, where we fund the conveyance with one agreement and the storage with another agreement. Because this way this is structured, once we sign the service agreements or the funding structure, there's no way out. It takes a 75% vote of the group, and you're locked in regardless of what the cost might be. Right now, we're looking at completing conveyance by 2026. The storage maybe by 2030. History has shown that gets extended over time. In the bigger picture, the original concept of the state water plan, going all the way back to the Perfield Canal, was to put 1 million acre foot storage in the location of Los Vaqueros. The record of decision for the environmental allowed 500,000. The reason we're at 275 is that's all they could squeeze out of the current dam base that's been built there. There's a need for up to 1 million acre feet of storage given the salinity changes, there's sea level rise in the estuary. Antioch is going to desalination. They're not participating in this, and they're at the foot of the dam. They'll be impacted if the dam fails. But to build the 500,000 or million, we have to remove LV1, 2, and potentially 3. Tear it out. Why aren't we doing that? Well, it may well be with the financial aspects, and we'll let Contra Costa explain it. But as soon as we finish this, we'll be working to remove it. And that is an odd way to do the public's business at 100, for our case, 100 million. And we're talking about $1 billion for the full project, plus cost and interest. So I would hope for a restart. Today, we're not approving the project of the funding. We're asking to join a JPA. And even that I'm reluctant to do. So we'll see. Thank you.
President Akbari, I have one question for the finance team,
Yes.
Mr. Wunderlich. Could you clarify what is in the CIP where it says $98 million for LVE and the numbers that you're showing later in the presentation here in the 50 million range? How much are we amortizing each year or contributing each year toward the project?
Yeah, so this is where it gets into a key difference. The $98 million is the nominal cost total that's included in the CIP over 25 years for payments for participation in the LVE project. The number that's, maybe if we could advance the slides. Let's see, let's keep going. Let's keep going. There, that's the slide.
Right.
So this 3.3 million, the future with LVE, kind of that second row, 3.3 million, that is our estimated cost in an average year of participation in LVE in 2020 dollars. And so that's where it gets kind of confusing, because what we've done in the CIP is we're looking out over a much longer time horizon, and it's nominal dollars. It's not deflated back to present day dollars. So this is deflated back to 2020 dollars, our estimated average cost. And then if we look at the next row, the 51.7 million, that's our estimated cost in today's dollars of future water supply purchases and operations with an LVE project. So that includes like what we would spend on SFPUC, on state water, semi-tropic, and LVE to meet our water supply needs in a future with LVE. In a future without LVE, if we go to the left, we're estimating it would cost between 54.3 to 57.1 million in today's dollars to meet those water supply needs because of what we would have to spend on supplemental San Francisco purchases.
So am I correct in interpreting what you're saying, that LVE is just one component of the project plus ACWD overall operations, and 3.3 is the estimated amount for that one component of all of our operations. Is that correct?
That's 100% correct. To get to the 51.7 million, you've got 3.3 million for LVE, but you've got, 30 million for, or 25 or 30 million, or kind of however the estimate is for SFPUC, another 10 to 12 million for state water, money for semi-tropic. But yeah, you've got that absolutely correct.
And a last follow-up here. You're estimating 3.3 million a year, but is there some kind of bell curve here that we're going to go through with the construction of the new dam?
Well, the current expectation is that the new facilities will be debt funded, and that we'll be making interest only payments on them up until the project is put into service in 2030. Then we would start with interest and principal payments. And so in theory, in about the year 2060, when the debt service is paid off, then we could see a cost reduction. But otherwise, the way this is modeled with really being heavily debt reliant, we've really been looking at it as more kind of an annual cost that includes debt service plus operations. And then what does that get us in terms of water supply benefits?
Mm-hmm. On that subject, I have a question for Ms. Patil. In the case of Calaveras Reservoir and all of the, or the San Francisco PUC WISA program on everything from Yosemite down to the Bay Area, they issued commercial paper for every segment of the project. And then when everything was completed, they put forward a $5 billion plus bond. And we're paying for that through our participation in Hetchy, our 4% interest. Is that the same route that CCWD is going to go through, or are they issuing bonds right up front?
Great question. So one of the rights of the new JPA is the right to take out debt. And when we say in the JPA agreement, we've actually defined, what that debt might be. So it's inclusive of bonds, short-term commercial paper, other mechanisms. And so I anticipate that the JPA taking out debt for local cost share would do whatever's most advantageous at the time, given the market conditions. But what we typically do at CCWD is we do exactly what staff is talking about. We take out short-term debt and then convert to long-term debt when the project is in place. And then we also look at opportunities to refinance without extending the term of repayment to take advantage of lower rates when they come up. So I would expect the JPA would do similar things to just be as financially responsible as possible.
I'm glad to hear that. So thank you for answering my questions. I'll turn it back to the other board members.
Are there any other questions from directors?
Hey, John.
If not, let me open it up to members of the public to see if there's any questions or comments so far. Hearing none, let me turn it back to, I think, to Laura or John.
Yeah, I can continue from here. I think we're at about slide 23, perfect. So I'm happy to continue. I've got a variety of slides related to the JPA and amendment that we're considering. So President Akbari, should I go ahead and continue at this point with that next section?
Yes, I believe so.
Great. Okay. So we have a few decisions ahead of us for the board to consider. And so we'll talk through those in detail, but just to provide an outline, first we're considering joining the Joint Powers Authority. We need to decide whether or not to execute the Joint Exercise of Power Agreement. Should we decide to do that, then the board would appoint a director and an alternate to the JPA. And then thirdly, we have a decision before the board about funding to approve what I'll refer to as the amendment number 3 to the cost share agreement for additional funding that would get us through the upcoming year. So next slide, please. So I'll provide a brief overview of the Joint Exercise of Powers Agreement. This basically forms the JPA and provides the governance framework for the implementation and oversight of the project. The agreement has been negotiated over the past year among the partners, and I do want to highlight that several folks from the district have participated quite actively in those negotiations, and that was the district's general manager, Bob Shaver, general counsel, Patrick Miyake, and the director of finance, Mr. Wunderlich, that you've heard from tonight, also participated in ththose discussions. And the board input, you'll recall that in September 2020, we discussed a number of the different issues that were being considered in the JEPA development, as well as in April 2021. We received some input, and that was taken by the team back to the partners for discussion, and we're pleased with how that came out. And hopefully you'll see that in the highlights that we cover today. So the JEPA does not address project funding that we would commit to at this time. The costs and the benefits will be addressed through a future service agreement that should the district decide to continue with the project for the long haul, we would be signing a service agreement with the JPA itself. And the goal is to complete those by the end of 2022, but there's no statutory deadline for that at this point. So the recitals on the JEPA, I did want to call your attention to those. In the agreement, there is no binding commitment to the project by the partners. So just to emphasize that we would be moving ahead with keeping our seat at the table, but not necessarily making a long-term commitment with this decision. And then a copy of the full JEPA was included in the meeting agenda packet. So in case you had a chance to review it at your leisure, it was there. Next slide, please. So a few highlights we just wanted to share about portions of the JEPA that we think were of interest to the board and kind of how they came out. We know voting thresholds were of interest. So the default is for simple majority, and for a new member, it's a simple majority, but also with the idea that there would be no adverse and material effect on other members with the joining of a new member. There's a few different things that are under supermajority or 3/4, and that's the amendment to the JPA, termination of a member, or termination of the agreement altogether. And there's a handful of things too that landed at a unanimous voting threshold, and that's to commence litigation, approve additional contributions, disproportionate, if there were to be disproportionate disbursement on termination of the agreement, employment positions and CalPERS, which can be costly, and also an amendment regarding unanimous requirement or regarding veto rights would also require a unanimous vote. And then also any related activity debt. And a related activity is something that a few partners might choose to pursue. And so that would be on the side, not necessarily the full JPA pursuing. And so any debt related to related activities would also need to be unanimous. Next slide, please. And then I know there have been some questions about veto rights for Contra Costa Water District and East Bay Mud. So wanted to briefly share that those would be triggered by an adverse and material effect on a facility or operational cost. Once a veto is raised, the JPA can either not proceed with the action or proceed, but start a meet and confer process would be required. The member using the veto must provide evidence to support the adverse and material effect. So there's a threshold that evidence would be needed. And then the vetoing member's board resolution would need to really state the specific findings of that adverse and material effect. So it does provide a threshold that those vetoes would have to meet to be able to be put into place. Next slide, please. And I won't go through this in detail, but just so you have the range of officers and staff or contractors that could be participating, the chair, vice chair, secretary, treasurer, these are all important positions for the JPA board, and administrator would be envisioned to be Contra Costa Water District initially, and then the board would have discretion on the executive director, and you can see that there's other positions that are envisioned here as well and described in the JEPA agreement. Next slide, please. A few other highlights. Finances, we know, are always important. There's the budget section. There would be one budget to include the operating expenses, debt service, and capital costs. Budget would be 1 year or 2 year at the JPA board's discretion. So participating would allow us to have some say in that. And section 7.7, if you reviewed it, involves the self-funding of the capital costs in place of participating in the JPA's bonds. There would be that option. The JPA would give 6 months notice if additional funds are necessary, and a refund or credit if self-funded monies are left over is also included, that provision. Next slide, please. And another big piece of interest in the agreement, I know, is the off-ramps or opportunities to get out of the agreement should an entity change their mind, or any of the partners. So there's multiple off-ramps to discontinue participation prior to the project final funding, and that includes if an agency didn't execute an interim funding agreement, if they didn't execute a service agreement, and that's what we've talked about as sort of the next big decision point, where as those service agreements would detail both the costs and the benefits that we would receive if we sign that agreement to participate for the long haul. Excessive cost is another off-ramp. You heard earlier about the uncertainties around engineers' estimates, and final construction costs. And so that does also provide another off-ramp. Withdrawal of other members, because that would impact the cost of others. That's also another off-ramp. Any revocation of state or federal funding or under unacceptable funding conditions. Also unacceptable permit conditions. If things don't pan out in order to be able to provide the permits to make use of the project and receive the benefits, that would be another off-ramp. And also water supply conditions as well. You know, that's something we'll of course want to know that we've got all that stuff settled before making a final commitment without an off-ramp. So the off-ramps do close once the final funding agreement with the state is executed. And my understanding is that final funding agreement to receive that state funding happens after everybody that's participating signs service agreements. So once that happens, that really does close the off-ramps, but I will ask for the next slide, please, just to explain one last off-ramp too. Oh, next, oh, perfect. There we go. Last but not least, withdrawal after that final funding agreement is executed is only allowed if you have approval by at least 75% of the JPA directors and there's no adverse and material effect on the others. And you can see here the definition of sort of the adverse material effect. And so I won't go through that in detail. You've got it on the slide. Or if some or all of the members agree to assume the withdrawing members' bond obligations or other capital cost obligations. So you can see the thresholds are higher once we've all committed to the project. And you basically have to ensure that someone else takes on your responsibilities there. Next slide, please. So in order to participate in the JPA, we have to execute the joint, the JEPA agreement that's been developed. We would need to designate and appoint by formal action a director and an alternate within 30 days of the JEPA effective date. The director must be a board member or a management level employee, and the alternate must be a board member or an employee as well. And that can be done by motion. And so the way we've set up tonight's action is to allow the board to do that by motion should they choose to do so. Oh, back one slide. Oh, yeah, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so just to give a bit of a comparison between the JEPA agreement and the amendment number 3. And so on the left, you have various conditions. The joint exercise of powers agreement is a new agreement. It gives the governance framework for implementation of the project, and it commits us to participate in governance and additional planning activities only. It does not commit us to any funding at this time, and the term of that agreement is until the agreement is terminated or until we withdraw. So in comparison to that, the other agreement that we're bringing to the board tonight for consideration is the cost share agreement amendment number 3. And that is simply an amendment to the existing agreement from 2019 for the cost sharing for planning activities. The purpose of approving that tonight would be to continue funding until the JPA is up and running. The commitment there would be funding through December 2022 for the planning activities, and the level of funding is $897,121. The term on that amendment would be through December 2022, or when work is complete or a successor agreement is made. Next slide, please. And so I've talked a little bit about this already as to where this amendment number 3 comes from. And you see the amount here with a little bit more detail. And just, I know the board may be aware of how much we've spent to date. It's about 1.2 million through the original agreement plus the amendment number 2. And the additional activities here, they're listed on the slide. I won't go through them in detail, but key here you'll see is initial administration of the JPA until it gets up and running is what that much of that funding would go toward. Next slide, please. So this brings us to the next steps. So just to be clear about kind of where we are and where things are going, with a goal of mid-September 2021, the idea is that the formation of the JPA would be complete and we would have the appointment of the directors and alternates by all the participating partners. In late September 2021, Contra Costa will be submitting the feasibility technical memo to the California Water Commission. And then I want to highlight for you here on October 20th, 2021, that is when the California Water Commission feasibility hearing is taking place, where Contra Costa will be presenting. And at that time, the Water Commission must find the project feasible to receive state funding. And I have this set up as arrows because all these steps feed into being able to meet the criteria for that feasibility funding and demonstrate through the formation of the JPA that the project is feasible moving forward. So next steps, or next slide, please. And following that feasibility hearing, it's envisioned that November 2021 would be the first JPA board meeting that would be anticipated. Mid-December 2021, full execution of the cost share agreement amendment number 3, so that all that funding is set up in place. And then in 2022, there will be continued planning activities that those participating in the JPA will be a part of. And in late 2022 or beyond is when we would expect the execution of service agreements with the more long-term commitments to cost and receiving the project benefits. So that hopefully lays out a picture of where we're going and the subset of things that we're looking to the board to take action on tonight. Next slide, please. So that brings me, and we're of course happy to answer whatever questions you may have, but that brings me to our staff recommendation tonight, which is by motion to adopt a resolution authorizing the general manager to execute the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Expansion Joint Exercise of Powers Agreement. 2, to designate and appoint a director and alternate to the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Joint Powers Authority. And 3, authorize the general manager to execute amendment number 3 to the cost share agreement for Los Vaqueros Reservoir Expansion project planning in an amount not to exceed $897,121. And we're happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you, Ms.
President
Heides.
Akbari, I would like to request a short break before we come back to any
Absolutely.
board or public discussion.
Absolutely. Why don't we take till 8:15? I have about 8:03 right now. That gives us about 12 minutes.
That's great. Thank you.
Yes. Perfect. I see Director Gunther. Are staff ready to continue?
Yes, President
Yeah.
Akbari, ready. We just shared with you our recommendation and I think some additional discussion amongst the board and taking public comments is appropriate.
Perfect. Do we want to pull up the last slide with the staff recommendation? I think that was slide 37. Great. I will now open it up for board questions and comments.
I have one question going back to the earlier presentation.
Mhm.
I think maybe this is for Mr. Wunderlich. So one question of curiosity I have, and this goes back to what my dad always used to say, if it looks too good, it probably is. And so on the slide that you have where you show the $3.3 million in annual contribution averaged out, and we have an average of 1,600 acre feet of water. Well, one divided into the other ends up being $2,062 per acre foot. But then we're creating an equal amount of savings with our investment. So when I worked out the numbers, it's like we're not paying anything for water. We're spending 3.3 million. We're getting back the same amount in operational cost savings, and we have 1,600 acre feet of water. So where am I not making a proper connection?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things that are going on here, and I'm also going to lean on Mr. Nizer to kind of help me out with the response to this question. One is our expectation is that in the future, at least in the next 10 to 15 years, especially as the WSIP program is kind of fully indebted, that San Francisco water costs will increase faster than the price of inflation or the expected inflation. So, we do expect, so those kind of San Francisco costs that we offset in large part are a little higher than today's cost. Two, Mr. Nizer talked a lot about some of the operational flexibilities, for example, the ability to keep more water in semi-tropic, to have more flexibility to bring water back and some of those things. I would assume that that's factored into that analysis at some level. But I'm not sure to what extent additional costs to reconfigure the distribution system are factored into a future without LVE. So I think I'll need to kind of look to Mr. Nizer now to help fill in some of the additional details in what's driving the differential between the two scenarios.
Sure. Thank you, John. Most of what you said was correct. It's really the offsetting of San Francisco purchases. And I wish I had the numbers in front of me. I'm sorry I don't. But the number we're using is consistent with what's in our financial planning model, and those assumptions were developed together with the finance manager. The future cost of San Francisco is substantial, and that really is the biggest chunk of savings. But leveraging our existing assets is that big part. There's stranded assets in this scenario where we don't have this additional state water supply that comes with the benefit of the surpluses. And by being able to have that little bit more using treatment plant number one, for example, is just that little increment really sets off a huge difference in operating costs. We haven't drilled down at the year by year. This is a roll up of 80 years, droughts, wet years, normal years. So that level of detail is there. But I don't think we're going to find anything terribly revealing. What Mr. Wunderlich mentioned was the additional capital costs. That information, there was an assumption in the presentation to committee, which included some modest distribution system enhancements in the future where we don't have treatment plant number one. I don't have those numbers on hand, I regret, but they are very modest compared to the realistic range of what they might be. We are looking at a need for storage in the upper zones, as well as boosting and additional pipelines, distribution system enhancements. So we just put in a very small placeholder. It's on the order, I want to say it's on the order of, it's a little bit more expensive than the TP1 assumption of 40 million, but not dramatically.
So, Mr. Nizer, give me a range, or the public a range here on, what you're predicting for the future in terms of cost per acre foot that we're really going to be paying for what we're storing in LVE.
For LVE?
Yeah.
Well, that's not the way I'm looking at it. It's a little bit, it would be a little bit like putting a cost benefit on a gear inside of an engine. It's a vital component to make the system work the way we want it to work. And to put the value on that one component is maybe a little misleading. I mean, I think the simple thing would be to take the 1,600 acre feet, the 3.3 million divided by 1,600 acre feet. But it's just a misleading number.
Well, that's what I did. That's $2,062.
Great. Okay, so that's our future San Francisco costs deflated to $2020 is going to be like over $3,000. So that makes sense.
So what I was doing, I don't know if you heard the earlier part of my question, but if you divide 1,600 acre feet into 3.3 million a year, and then you look at the operational cost savings that we're generating, which are just about the same, then your cost of water appears to be zero. And so if you're paying more for San Francisco water, well, that now you have to factor that back in. Anything over that $0 amount, plus maybe the amortized cost of rebuilding TP1.
Was there a question in there?
Well, I was trying to address what my father used to say. There's no free lunch. If it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And so I'm trying to figure out, what do we tell our customers? What is the cost per acre foot that we're looking at here into the future?
So I would say that the need to get to that level is still at that next phase where we would make the permanent commitment. I mean, where we are right now, I just like to refer to it as sort of the next round of poker, and we're just anting up for another round of game that we've been in for a few years. We've been putting in money, and here's a slightly bigger ante. But the big decision is going to come up over the next, I guess, it's about 18 months as we get to the service agreement, where we finalize the actual costs. Hopefully we'll do some improved reliability modeling with the CCWD team. And we'll be able to kind of detail out the sort of final business case. But as we mentioned, tonight is really just a gut check of does this make sense to continue pursuing? So that's sort of the level we went to, and in part because the level of accuracy on the numbers is it's just a lot of assumptions in there. So it's not the right way to look at it at this time, but I would definitely say the simplest thing would be to say, if we want to call it $2,000 an acre foot at that sort of simplistic of a way to look at it, the straight comparison is to our marginal cost, which is all that San Francisco purchase, which is on the order of, I want to say it's about 3,000 an acre foot, and you could leave it that simple. But now's not the time to get that refined, in my opinion.
Thank you for the feedback and answers.
Okay, well, it looks like we're coming up to a point where someone will be making a motion. At $2,000 an acre foot, San Francisco Bay is a cost-effective, reliable alternative to desalination. So we're throwing a lot of money at things which could have an upward rise. We're basing part of this on Semi-Tropic, which by March of next year, 2022, may go away as a water resource for us. Although Semi-Tropics is under contract to find an alternative, we have the problem that they're overdrafting and plan to overdraft to 2040. And they've submitted that to the state and under the Sigma review, and it seems to violate all the principles of Sigma. So Santa Clara, the Valley Water District, has raised serious concerns about that. We should as well. Contra Costa has cut themselves a pretty good deal here. We've got a situation where we're going to arguably reimburse them for the cost inflated by inflation since they built it through the year 2030. And then put a 40% rate on that, which gives them more than 100% payback for what's already built. And they're not participating in what's going forward in any significant way. Contra Costa gets a free ride. We end up with a water project that's going to make it very difficult to build a regional water solution, which is a 500,000 to 1 million acre foot storage connected to the state water project and the South Bay, including the South Bay Aqueduct through Bethany. We have failed as a district to seek and secure water storage rights at Del Val at nominal cost. And during a drought, we should be pursuing that. We haven't. It's one of our great failures. And that would at least put us onto a conveyance only model, not a storage model. Points have been made on two areas. The one that our distribution system, as we designed in the 70s, is built as spokes with hubs at our import sites, where in a contingency environment, we would need to have, could not work without that. We should be putting our money into some contingency planning, developing the ability to transfer waters throughout our district, relying on the Niles cone, which was not there when we did the original water planning 50, 60 years ago. So our final decision will be made sometime, probably sooner than we might think. One of the questions I do have, the Contra cost is going up for a feasibility review in October of this year before the State Water Commission. They have to show that they can get 75% matching funding for non-public benefit water projects, a major portion. How do you do that without showing some type of a commitment by individual districts to fund the program and specify what their level of participation is? Clearly, I believe we're oversubscribed if we're looking at only 1,600 acre feet of year of water. There are aspects of this which are disappointing and incredibly expensive. $150 million for the Los Vaqueros latest expansion, a pipeline, and TP2 runs to about $2,000 per customer that we're putting on them with pitifully little cumulative benefit. It's going to be an expensive jump, and it's going to raise their water cost to well over $2,000 an acre foot. That's not a good deal for the district. But the final decision will be coming up within a year. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments so far. Any other members of the board wish to make a comment or ask a question before I open it up to the public?
I guess
Go
Go
ahead,
ahead,
Director. Okay.
No, go ahead.
I guess I'm just going to say that based on staff's presentation, the cost, very high level cost with lots of uncertainties, is fairly similar between LVE and LVE conveyance only. On top of that, I think we all recognize, just based on this drought that we're in right now, we desperately need the ability to store surplus water locally. Continuing participation in the LVE project would give us a seat at the table to keep that door open to have a local storage for surplus water. I definitely would recommend that we would support continued participation in LVE until we have better numbers, just so that we have an option to have a local storage. Due to climate change and the drought, we could no longer count down the snowbanks, right? We do need a replacement storage, and LVE right now, at least on paper, based what staff has estimated, is the best chance we have. I understand Director Lee feels strongly about reoperating Del Val to create more storage, but that involves other complications, including potentially shut down a regional park. That is not something that I am willing to consider as viable right now. That doesn't mean that's a never, but participation now, keep the door open, keep the options open. We should go for it.
If I could, oh shoot.
Director Weed, did you wish to make a comment?
If I might, I lost my video here and kicked the thing over. When at Del Val, we have 7,500 acre feet of storage we're not using there now. We could double that to 15,000 acre feet by relocating the intake to a very small water treatment plant, less than 1/2 MGD, and set the bottom of the reservoir and not impact at all the Park District's visitor center, which is built for the third time in the flood zone. But minimal, I mean, not almost inconsequential impacts to the Park District. And we could gain up to 15,000 acre feet for something that's already built and plumbed and have it now, rather than spending $150 million for something that we might get in 10 years. So thank you.
President Akbari, I kind of forgot part two of my what I was trying to say is that I think one of the part of the motion is for us to designate and appoint a director and alternate if we choose to go down this path. If we are making all three items in one item, I would recommend we have a discussion on who we want to be the appointed director and alternate.
Let me ask staff, do we need to break this up into three separate motions, or should we be taking this as one motion?
I believe you can do it all at once, but I would also defer to Mr. Miyake if he's got any comments about breaking it up.
Yeah, it's really up to the board. You could do it all at once, or you could take one action at a time. So I'll defer to the board, but from a legal perspective, you could do either.
Okay. I guess Director Huang, if we want to take this as one motion, then I guess this is the right time for us to talk about appointments of a director and alternate.
I will leave it up as an open discussion, but I do feel strongly that one of the representatives should be from senior management staff. And I would suggest Mr. Wonderlich, if he's willing to volunteer. I am honestly torn about the other position. I strongly feel that perhaps a board member should be taking that seat. However, as we could all tell from today's discussion, there are very diverse opinions on this board, and I am not quite sure what to do here. So I'm definitely open to the board's discussion and wisdom here.
Before we talk about potential the director and alternate, could we hear from the other two directors just what their general comments are?
Of course.
I'm generally supportive of moving forward here.
Yeah, thank you, Director Sethi. I think that's, I'll go ahead and, I didn't throw my comments out earlier. I do support the concept. Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns. They're going to be unknowns. The project's too big and too important not to have those unknowns. The situation we're in today is unknown. We're looking at potential issues with the drought next year. Rising sea levels, lack of snowfall. Now, I'd like to just address Lake Delval quickly in that I don't necessarily disagree. I mean, there's options there, but the political will, there's no political will there. And unless there was some political support, that project's dead. And yeah, it would be nice if we could get some political support for it, but because there are some values to that, but it shouldn't be an end all. And I don't recommend trying to flood the park, but if East Bay Regional Park District decides that, hey, they're cool with that and rebuilds their facilities, then I'm not going to get in their way. But at this point, nobody's talking about it. The state's not talking about it. Nobody wants it except a few people. And so it's not simple, and it certainly is going to be very, very costly. Now, that's my opinion, strictly my opinion. As far as Los Vaqueros goes, yeah, it's going to be expensive. Why is Contra Costa doing it? Well, they can. They have a reservoir in position that can be raised, that can meet the requirements. It's one of a few spots in the whole state that will meet this ability. Now, I would love the state to throw more money at this. The state's out there talking about, oh, we got money we want to spend on projects, and, here's a project. Throw some money at it, for gosh sakes. This is very beneficial to the state. Hopefully they will. And I think political pressure should be put upon them to spend money on this project. They're talking about, oh, we got infrastructure money, we got water money. Well, tell me where you're going to spend it. Studies and stuff that aren't going to work. This is something that's already there. It can be done. It's great regionally. I agree with what the staff has set up. I trust the staff. And yes, can it be more? Will it be more? Most likely. I wish I didn't think that way, but haven't seen many projects that wouldn't. However, if we're going to have to increase our San Francisco water usage, that's going to be expensive. That's pretty much a given. And with the, just listening on the radio, Sierra Club, they're putting pretty heavy duty heat on San Francisco right now. So I don't see San Francisco supply getting any cheaper. And I certainly see it going up significantly and probably on a decline as they are required to put more water back to the environment. Whether we agree with that or not, that is what is going to happen. More water is going to go back to the environment. We can't, I don't know if I agree with it or not. I just know it's going to happen. So I'm okay with what the staff said. I think we should press ahead. I've got some ideas on the director issue. I agree, director and a staff member, and I'm all right with number 3.
I'd like to
if I can very quickly
build on Judy's.
Okay.
John, go ahead.
I want to correct something that's been misstated twice now. I'm not proposing flooding out any park district facilities. We have 7,500 acre-feet of storage that we currently are allocated to Deval that needs an administrative recognition that we can use it for storage. There's an additional 15,000 acre-feet that's below that. If you wanted to flood out the park district facilities, yeah, you could grab another 50,000 on top of all of that. But there's 30,000 acre-feet that is there that's not being used and would not impact the park district operations in any significant manner whatsoever. The cost, basically cost-free. That's the failure. And that would meet the storage issues that we're talking about at Los Vaqueros. It already exists and is plumbed, and it's a simple change in an administrative agreement to get the rights to use it, saving you $150 million.
I just quickly want to build on Director Wong's comments and Director Gunther. We need a seat at the table. We've already been participating toward getting this joint exercise of power agreement. All of the other LAPs are going to be participating. I heard from a couple of board members I spoke with today from Santa Clara. They're going to most likely move ahead with joining in as well. And we know Zone 7 is supportive as well. So we're gonna have all 3 South Bay contractors, hopefully, working together on this board with a seat at the table. And like staff is indicating, there is still a lot to be worked out over the next 18 months and well into the future. I am enthusiastic about regional projects because I think that's the future of the Bay Area and other large metropolitan areas across the state. And I have participated in quite a few of the California Water Commission meetings along with the CCW staff and have spoken on behalf of the board at those meetings. And although I asked a lot of questions tonight, I didn't want to indicate to the staff that I had reservations. I am supportive, but what I'm hoping will happen is that we can better explain the business case to our community. I think that's really important. So that's all I need to say.
So I'll jump in here. I think it's been stated a couple of times already tonight, but I recognize that there's still quite a bit of uncertainty around some of the projections that were presented tonight. But I would join Directors Sethi, Huang, and Gunther in supporting the staff recommendation, because it's still, based on tonight's presentation, it still enables us to gain some more reliability and flexibility in our system. We can take advantage of surpluses from the Delta, be a little bit more flexible with semi-tropic and other storage that we're already making use of. And like was already mentioned, we're not making a firm commitment tonight. We do have many off-ramps still, a lot more points where we can make a more firm commitment or decision, or if we choose to at some point pull out, we do have that opportunity still. So I think given what decision we can make tonight, I think it makes sense for us to move forward and to like was said already, to keep a seat at the table. So I'm going to be in favor of that. And then on the appointments, I would also agree that I think there's a combination of an elected director and a staff member, I think makes most sense. Who serves as the director and alternate, I think I'm a little bit more flexible on, though my initial reaction would be that one of the directors should serve as the director and a staff member as alternate. But again, very keen on kind of seeing where everybody else on the board lands on that item. And then I'm, again, comfortable with item number 3 that's part of this motion tonight. With that, I would like to open it up to members of the public as well. There's been a lot of information that was shared tonight, and I want to see if there's anyone who has questions or would like to make a comment. And I see a hand raised from Mr. Nishimura, so we'll start with you.
Thank you, President Akbari. I think everybody has heard that the changing climate, one of the consequences of the changing climate is that the variance or standard deviation of rainfall will be increased, meaning that we'll have periods of extended drought, but also when it rains, it will really, really rain. And this proposed project really capitalizes on being able to capture water during the few peak flow times when after a large rainfall event, where there is true surplus water. And I think that is going to become more and more prevalent in the rainfall patterns in California. So from that perspective, I think it's a good idea to look at means to capture that very, very infrequent but large pulses of surplus water. I did have one question related, to maybe it was back to slide 20. One of the stated financial benefits of this project is to reduce the reliance on SFPUC water. And I do agree that SFPUC water is expensive, and based on the information that's been presented by SFPUC, it is likely to get considerably more expensive, and the costs will increase at much greater than the rate of inflation. So anything that can be done to mitigate or reduce the reliance of the district on SFPUC water is welcome. However, we do know that we do use SFPUC water not only to supplement our water supplies, but also to combat the PFAS situation that we have. And the question is, well, it's twofold. One is, A, what is the quality of this water relationship related to PFAS? And B, if we were to gain access to this water, could we use this water in lieu of SFPUC water in our blending facilities? Thank you.
Well,
I'll go ahead, Ed. I don't know the PFAS answer offhand.
Yeah, I was just going to start off, and I know, Thomas, you could also support the second. I guess one of the benefits of Los Vaqueros is that we can be a little bit finicky about when we're pulling water out of the Delta. I think a benefit of the existing reservoir is that it can be used to ensure that the water that's stored there and delivered is of high quality. I don't know what the PFAS levels are in the Delta. I don't know that I've seen that information. But on the second part of the question, we couldn't use it directly to replace the blending facility San Francisco supply. And it wouldn't be as low hardness as the San Francisco supply is currently. So really the offset of San Francisco supplies has to do with the overall water supply mix in the future. And the fact that we'd be set up to better optimize what we have available through the South Bay Aqueduct. So that's the real benefit of Los Vaqueros in the scenarios that we modeled. And I will also add, because I know that there's been some discussion, the approach that we took in analyzing what we called, the sort of gut check business case, really tried to keep apples and apples as close as possible. And in doing so, we kind of took a holistic view of our overall operations now and in the future with and without Los Vaqueros. And in doing so, of course, we risk tying all the future costs of all the other future facilities with Los Vaqueros. But one of the things I just wanted to point out that, say, Mission San Jose, it's not necessarily an additional cost associated with Los Vaqueros, but rather it's the facility will be required as long as we're going to rely on state water project water in the future at all, then we'll need Mission San Jose or TP1 as we showed on the slides. So I know that we conflated the two in order to sort of paint this holistic view of how our operations would be different in the future, but it's not a cost that's tied directly to Los Vaqueros. So I don't know, Thomas, if you had anything else to add to the response there.
No, Ed, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, and Mr. Stevens, if I could just comment on the PFAS, I don't believe we've seen it in state project water, so I wouldn't necessarily expect it to show up in Los Vaqueros either. I don't know if Ms. Patil has any information on PFAS specifically, but we appreciate the question.
Correct, Laura. We don't put groundwater in Los Vaqueros directly, like pumped in. We don't see a PFAS issue there, but just keep in mind, I guess, that the delivery through the transfer vessel pipeline under most conditions would be blended with water that's coming up the hill from Banks pumping plant. So it's going to be a blend so it'd be pretty typical of what you currently see. It's only in the case that like Banks was not operating due to some regulatory shutdown or some other emergency, and you saw water coming straight out of the reservoir. Yeah, it might be a bit better quality than you might be used to out of Banks. But other than that, it would look pretty similar most of the time.
Director Akbari?
Yes.
Yeah, President Akbari.
Mhm.
Judy mentioned supporting Jonathan Wunderlich for one of these positions. I would support that as well. And I would offer to the board, at the board's pleasure, I would be interested in serving as in the director position. If anyone else is really eager to, I will defer. But I would be willing. I recognize this is going to take quite a bit of time, and I'm willing to put in that time. And secondarily, I will make a commitment to represent the district, not myself, on this board and the district's interest as a whole. So I'll just offer that out there.
I would support Director Sethi's position.
Likewise, I would be in support of that.
Same here.
And maybe I can just add a little bit of information. I have been in contact with a number of GMs associated with the various agencies involved as local agency partners in this. And talking about what their plans are at other agencies with regard to directors and alternates serving on the JPA board. And I'll say that there's a mix of electeds and staff. So I think what the board's contemplating here makes a lot of sense. And I also think that Mr. Wunderlich would be a good alternate in that a lot of the early work of this board will have a lot to do with financial issues going forward, the funding agreements, the interim and final funding agreements related to various local agency partner participation, the funding related to the Department of Water Resources and Bureau of Reclamation, issuing bonds and so forth. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And just as a reminder, the board has the ability to change directors and alternates at any time. So I just wanted to add that additional sort of detail as the board considers who they'd like to appoint to these positions.
Well, I think unless there's any other questions or comments, maybe we can make a motion.
Can we split the vote potentially? I can certainly support Paul Sethi to be and John Wunderlich to be the two. I'd like to abstain on the other two items. Maybe I can change my mind over time. But right now, I think it's a poor financial and water resource planning decision on the part of the district. But the final decision will be made in the coming year.
I think we can split this up into 3 motions. So I'll look for one of the directors to make.
I'll move for item number 1 of the staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Directors Weed,
Abstain.
Gunther,
Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
and Akbari.
Aye.
And,
I will make the.
Go ahead, Judy.
I'll make the motion to designate and appoint Director Sethi as the director and Mr. Jonathan Wunderlich as alternate to the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Joint Powers Authority.
I will second.
Directors Weed,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
and
I always
Akbari.
like voting for myself, even in the ballot booth.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you for volunteering, Director Seth. All right, so for the last one, I would like to make the motion to authorize the general manager to execute amendment number 3 to the cost share agreement for Los Vaqueros Reservoir Expansion Project planning in an amount not to exceed $897,121.
I will second.
Directors Weed,
Abstain.
Gunther,
Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
and Akbari.
Aye. Thank you all. Thank you, Ms. Heides, Mr. Wunderlich, and Mr.
There.
Nizer, sorry, Thomas. And also thank you, Ms. Patil, for joining us this evening as well. Appreciate all of the support on this item.
Thank you, and congrats to the new director and the new alternate.
All right, moving on to item 5.6. Resolution approving the intention to change from at-large to zone-based elections for election of members of the board of directors. And I will turn it to Mr. Stevenson for this item.
Thank you, Mr. President. Akbari, I can go ahead and handle this one myself. So the board of directors are currently elected at large for the district's enabling legislation. Generally, under the California Voting Rights Act, at-large elections are prohibited if racially polarized voting limits the ability of minorities to elect or influence the election of minority candidates. The district received a letter from a law firm alleging that the district's at-large elections violate the California Voting Rights Act. The district does not agree with these allegations. However, in order to ensure that the board most effectively represents all interests of its residents and encourages the fullest voter participation, the board will change to a zone-based election system for election of board members. The district will begin the process following the release of the 2020 census data. The board last discussed the resolution of intention at the July 8, 2021 Board of Directors meeting. So this is the first formal step in a process. It would be followed by development of 5 district zones following the release of the 2020 census results, upon which those zones would be based. There would be a public hearing process to receive public input and formalize these zones. And the new districts would apply to the board elections, beginning with the next election in November next year. So staff's recommendation is by motion, adopt the resolution approving the intention to change from at-large zone-based elections for the election of members of the board of directors. And we'll be happy to address any questions or comments.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Are there any questions or comments from members of the board? Here.
I'll go ahead and make a comment. I have to.
Okay.
I will be supporting the motion. However, I feel this is completely wrong. I don't agree with it. However, legally, we don't have a whole lot of options here. A decision was made by a court and a lawyer has decided to run with it. So if we don't do this, we're going to waste ratepayer money. I truly don't believe we have an issue that this is supposed to solve. In fact, going to districts, in my opinion, is not a good thing. I'm the only director that lives outside of Fremont, but I represent everybody. I just don't represent Union City. I represent Newark, I represent Fremont, South Fremont, and as a group, we do that. But when you start going into this type of deal, suddenly, you know, maybe that next representative from that district decides, no, I want to represent my little portion of the district. You don't get that in a that large election. And I don't feel that Union City has lost anything by having 4 directors, or Newark has lost anything. But it is what it is. Like I said, we don't have much of a choice but to accept this and move ahead. I just wanted to say I do not support what we're doing. However, I will be supporting it because we have no choice.
I backed up all the words of Director Gunther.
Thank you, Director Gunther and Director Sethi, and I'll keep it short. I agree with everything that Director Gunther just stated. Hearing no other comments or questions from directors, I'll open it up to members of the public. Are there any members of the public who wish to ask a question or make a comment? And I see a hand raised from Mr. Nishimura.
Thank you, President Akbari. I've read the summary and staff recommendation on this item. While the district disagrees with the plaintiff's allegation of a CVRA violation, and I agree with the district's position that no such violation has occurred, I see little harm to the district to modify its election procedures for the board of directors as demanded by the plaintiff. If this change enables greater public participation and greater access by interested parties, so much the better. I recall a director lamenting on the fact that so little public participation takes place within the district. On the other hand, as the previous director pointed out, there is plenty of evidence of the potential costs to litigate this issue further. Another possible positive outcome would be a potential reduction in the cost for a candidate to run for a seat. While there has been no indication from the registrar of voters, it should be less costly for a candidate to include a ballot statement for a race with fewer precincts, as the costs are allocated on a pro rata basis. If true, this would lower the barrier to entry for those who may choose to serve on the board. I support staff recommendation to adopt this resolution to institute zone elections for the district. Given that the Census Bureau released data today to help with redistricting, demographic analysis should be possible in sufficient time to meet the timetable required by statute for the November 2022 election. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nishimura. Are there any other members of the public who wish to ask a question or make a comment? Hearing none, I will turn it back to the board to see if we have a motion.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Okay. I would like to have one comment under the motion,
Yes, Director Reed.
that there be, as best we can, a clarification that this process will be the next step will be to triggered by a excuse me. But the next step will be triggered by the release of a properly formatted census statement, which is anticipated to be sometime in late September. And that is the one that was released as of today, recently, as early as late as today, would be deemed preliminary, and that the final would be the one that we anticipate sometime in late September. And that triggers a 90-day time frame for us to set up our various meetings, et cetera.
So let me turn it over to Mr. Miyake, because I believe that would require a slight modification to the resolution that we're looking to adopt.
So the resolution just has a certain time frame set forth in it. And if the board wants to change it, the board certainly has the discretion to do that. So it's really up to the board whether they would like to change the resolution that's been presented or not.
So let me then open it up to the board to see, do we want to make any amendments to the resolution?
As I read, I don't have the resolution in front of me, unfortunately. But as I recall, we have a statement in there that we will initiate a 90-day time frame upon the release of a document by the Census Bureau.
I would ask that the board approve the resolution as is.
And I will support Director Seppi's recommendation.
Okay. Then under comment in our minutes, that we would anticipate that trigger to be the one at the end of September.
Noted. Okay.
I can say that the resolution anticipates that data being available at the end of September. But certainly we would be in compliance with the rules with regard to starting the process that's described in the resolution.
And that more specifically, that the release that was done today is not the trigger. But if we can put that in the minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Weed. So we have a motion and a second. So I'll ask District Secretary to take roll call, please.
Directors Reed,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Wong,
Aye.
Seppi,
Aye.
and Akbari.
Aye. That concludes our action calendar for tonight, and we'll move on to reports. Moving on to item 6.1. I know we had a member of the public who wanted to make a comment on one of these items. Mr. Nishimura.
Thank you, President Akbari. This is in relationship to item 6.1.3, which relates to the minutes of the Finance Committee meeting that was held on July 20th, 2021. I've reviewed the material presented at that meeting and the minutes thereof included in today's board packet. I would like to express some concern over the use of property tax mechanism as a debt collection tool. While it is true that some of the district's delinquent accounts belong to those who are taking advantage of the system, Other delinquent accounts belong to those who have been truly impacted by the pandemic. The governor has repeatedly indicated that aid is coming and that the state will give aid to those impacted by the pandemic to pay back rent and utilities. Given the state's performance with EDD, however, it could be a very long wait. Nevertheless, adding the additional threat of tax liens and possible eviction and liquidation is counterproductive and fails to meet the district's mission. It makes the district a bully. I'm also concerned by the nexus of the need to collect past due bills with the effort to remove part or all of the regular water bill onto the property tax system. While there are some cogent arguments to do so, such decision needs to be made on its own on the pros and cons of servicing regular water bills using the property tax mechanism, rather than using the current issue with pandemic-related delinquent accounts to quietly make a de facto decision. Policy decisions should be made through critical analysis, not expediency. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nishimura. Are there any other comments or questions on item 6.1? Hearing none, we'll move on to item 6.2, operational reports. Do we have any questions or comments from directors or members of the public? Director Sethi.
So I noted in the board packet that our below Hayward Fault portion of the Niles aquifer is well below our current targets and well below previous years. So I wondered what the strategy is on the part of the district to refill the underground basin here. Even the upper Hayward Fault was a little bit lower too, but I was more concerned about below Hayward Fault.
Yeah, I think our Director of Resources, Ms. Heides, can respond to that.
Sure, and I'm trying to flip through and find exactly the chart. I'm not finding it super quick, but I will just comment. You know, we are seeing a little bit lower levels than in wetter years, but nothing at this point to be alarmed with. We're operating within our various, drought parameters, reducing desal use of ARP wells and things like that we would typically do to maintain below Hayward Fault conditions in a drier year. And above the Hayward Fault as well, we are not necessarily seeing anything that we cannot refill. So that's all factored into our optimization modeling that we do each year, so that we plan to be able to recover those levels to the best of our ability going into the next year. With whatever imported water we have available. Refilling the Niles cone is always a priority. So I can't speak to the exact levels because I'm not finding it with a quick click of my mouse here, but hopefully that helps to explain.
Yeah, I was looking at slide 304 and slide 305 and 6. But the one on 305 is the below Hayward Fault, and we're below target, and we're below, kind of well below where we were last year in the groundwaters.
Yeah, and I can also just add that part of our overall strategy this year, and when we developed this strategy last spring, based upon the water supply forecasts at that time, was to preserve the storage that we have in San Luis and really leverage Semi-Tropic to the best of our ability. And by the way, Semi-Tropic has again been really over-delivering and very helpful for us in this time of drought. And go a little deeper in the groundwater basin than we would normally go. And so you're correct, Director Sethi, that we're below, certainly a few feet below where we were this time last year, and below sort of the normal, the level that we'd normally operate. But that's as a result of the water supply conditions that we're in. But we're doing that in order to preserve the water that we have in San Luis and also Del Val.
No other comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sethi. Are there any other comments or questions on any of our operational reports? Mr. Nishimura.
Well, since Director Gunther didn't jump in, I'll just comment on the hardness map. I guess congratulations in order. I just looked at it again, and I think every K point is below 150, which I think is your standard. So kudos to the treatment plant operators and distribution operators for getting that to happen.
I appreciate Mr. Nishimura stepping in for me there. Yes, I did see it. Thank you. And I do appreciate it.
But John Weed requesting basically that we schedule on one of our or more of our committees a discussion of water quality during the summer months. This past summer, as we've had in a series of summer months, a deterioration in the taste and complaints about taste and odor. Several weeks ago, there was some traffic on one of the neighborhood social media sites that talked about swampy water, or water that tastes like dirt. So our staff also commented they had encountered that same thing. In our discussions, it turned out that ACWD does not have a standard, a quantified standard for taste and odor, but recognize that this is an annual problem. So hopefully we can look at that, determine what's necessary. We've had geosmin, toxic algae in the past that's given us serious problems at treatment plant number 2. We've tried ozone, and it's not capable of handling the delta water during the summer months when we have the higher algae counts. So that strikes me as being a systemic issue and one that we should look at, and also a administrative issue in coming up with some standards and a method to actually determine when we are providing a high quality water and when we're not.
So Director Weed, thank you for the suggestion, and we are planning to bring an item to the Operations and Water Quality Committee where we can talk more about our operational approach to taste and odor issues in the South Bay Aqueduct water. That's an important part of our water supplies. So that's part of the plan. So thank you for the suggestion.
Thank you. Let me quickly add, we're not violating any of the state water criteria. Taste and odor is a local decision and criteria, not a health issue. So thank you.
Thank you for the comments. Hearing no other comments or questions, we can move on to item 6.3. I don't believe we have any staff presentations, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so we can move on to item 6.4, starting with 6.4.1, update on the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think Mr. Stevenson will be taking this item.
That's correct. Thank you, President Akbari. And I just wanted to provide just a verbal update on our ongoing challenges related to COVID-19 to start with. And so as the board knows, conditions continue to evolve rapidly due to the spread of the Delta variant. We've modified our protocols now, and we're wearing masks indoors in accordance with the Alameda County Health Department's August 4th mandate. We continue to strongly encourage our employees to get vaccinated, and as of now, about 72% of our employees have provided confirmation of vaccination. Now, with regard to re-officing and returning our work from home employees to the office, and also the resumption of in-person board meetings, you may remember that we had tentatively planned to generally re-office work from home employees and return to in-person board meetings and other public meetings in September. But due to the ongoing Delta variant, we've pushed our general re-officing date back to October 4th. And that date for re-officing work from home staff may change as we continue to monitor developments within the county, the state, and Cal OSHA, as well as the conditions in local schools. So we continue to adjust our planning as needed and provide as much notice to our employees as possible. So that October 4 date may change depending on what happens with COVID around us. Now, on-site public meetings are now planned to resume the week of October 4 with the Operations and Water Quality Committee on October 5, the LICA Committee on October 9, and the October regular board meeting on October 10. So these are being planned to be held in person at the district's headquarters. And we're still planning for the option for the public to participate virtually, and we would be noticing those meetings as such. So 2 quick points on that. One, the exemptions to the Brown Act, which allowed for virtual board meetings like we're having tonight, and other public meetings will be expiring at the end of September. That's the reason why we're continuing to plan for in-person public meetings starting in October. At this point, there's been no indication that the governor would issue another executive order extending this date, but it is possible, and we're following this very closely. If an extension is issued, we'll notify the board. Also, there is a bill in the legislature, it's AB 361, that would provide some flexibility with this. But as it stands right now, that's not an urgency measure. And so if it's passed, and it's looking favorable at the moment, but if it's passed, it would not take effect until January 2022. So outside any other intervention, say the bill gets converted to an urgency measure or the governor extends the current Brown Act exemptions, we would be planning to return to in-person public meetings in October. And I urge the board to participate in person in these public meetings when we do resume public meetings in person. With regard to other protocols within the district, as the Delta variant continues to move through our community, particularly threatening unvaccinated people, we are preparing to update our COVID-19 workplace protocols to require that all unvaccinated staff receive weekly COVID-19 testing. This would be intended to help identify any positive cases, including asymptomatic cases, as early as possible and protect all staff. So staff are currently working on updated protocols and testing processes, and will initiate engagement with both union groups on this topic shortly. In fact, we've initiated discussions with one already. Finally, and really kind of only tangentially related to COVID, we're moving toward a longer-term telecommuting program. So as you recall, prior to COVID-19, we had a telecommuting pilot program, which was successful and was showing some benefits. Then COVID hit, and so we moved most office employees to remote work out of necessity. So while adjustments were required and new workflows and tools needed to be implemented, staff have been able to remotely work effectively in this mode for more than 16 months. So we're planning to leverage these benefits and improvements that we've observed in these programs by implementing a limited telecommuting program on an ongoing basis. And under that program, some staff would be able to work remotely up to 2 days per week on average. And we, of course, confirm that ongoing coverage of on-site duties and continuous customer service would be assured. So we continue to seek out opportunities for employee wellness and work-life balance for those employees who cannot participate in the telecommuting program, and that's an ongoing effort. With that, I will turn it over to our Director of Finance, John Wunderlich, to tell us about the next item, 6.4.2.
Great, thank you, Mr. Stevenson. So the next item, Achievement of Excellence in Procurement Award. So the National Procurement Institute established the Achievement of Excellence in Procurement program to recognize organizational excellence in public procurement. This award is earned by those organizations that demonstrate excellence by obtaining a high score based on standardized criteria. The criteria are designed to measure innovation, professionalism, productivity, e-procurement, and leadership attributes of the procurement organization. And I know Mr. Farrow, our purchasing officer, has shown me the whole scorecard. There are a lot of different components you have to earn points on to qualify. And so I'm pleased to inform the board and the public that our purchasing office was recently recognized with this award. While achievement of this award requires meeting industry standards on a wide range of issues, I would especially like to recognize our procurement team for their professionalism, customer service, and adoption of technology. And in particular, as it relates to customer service, they undertook the effort earlier this year of conducting basically a procurement satisfaction survey, both with their internal customers, meaning district staff who rely on them to procure the goods and services they need to do their jobs, as well as a survey of our vendors to receive feedback from our vendors on what it's like to do business with us, to see how we can improve and provide the best possible service to them as well. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Wunderlich. And next up for item 6.4.3, we have our Director of Water Resources, Laura Heides, who actually has 3 topics to talk about quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. And I have just a few quick slides, but I'll keep tonight's drought update brief. As the board's aware, 2020 and 21 have been 2 consecutive very dry years, and early information is pointing to dry conditions and increased temperatures continuing into 2022. An emergency proclamation in 50 counties remains in place, and the state's reservoir storage levels are low. The district's receiving 5% of our annual Table A allocation from state water projects this year, and Oroville Reservoir, where the water originates, is seeing historic low levels this year, and in fact has stopped generating power due to low levels at this point. The state has called for 15% voluntary conservation below 2020 levels from all Californians, which the district continues to support through our outreach and programs. And next slide, please. So the district will meet our water demands this year, as we've mentioned previously, by drawing on storage and saving all of this year's state water project allotment for next year. And we're continuing to plan for additional dry years, including close coordination with the Department of Water Resources in planning for next year's deliveries, given conditions in the Delta. We encourage our customers to find ways to reduce water voluntarily by 15%, because the water we save and the habits we build now will really help if conditions worsen next year. We're continuing to focus on the One Saved Water messaging campaign to encourage customers to take action. And here you can see a creative graphic to demonstrate how each one of us can make a difference. 1 less watering day per household per week, 2 less flushes per person per day, and 3 less showering minutes every day. And the State Water Board, so that's just a fun little example we wanted to share with you all. The State Water Board is also beginning to collate statewide data and will be reporting on progress in meeting the conservation goal at their 2nd meeting in September. So we'll be following that as well. And we'll be continuing to provide updates to the Water Resources and Conservation Committee on water demands, which have not changed significantly since the last update in late July to our committee. And I'd refer you to page 259 of the board packet to review that information in detail for those that might be interested. Next slide, please. Last but not least, I'd just like to share again our district drought website address, where customers and others can go for the latest updates on drought conditions and see what programs and services we have to offer to help customers save water, including some of the programs you have highlighted here on the slide. And we have continued to see a lot of interest in our programs and in folks reporting water rates reports, and definite activity on the water conservation front. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have on the drought or the other 2 quick items that I've got, which are that staff shared during the July board workshop that we'd be holding a virtual community information meeting for the Niles Cone Groundwater Basin Extraction Well Site Evaluation Project, that we were planning that for August. The meeting date has been postponed, and it's being planned tentatively right now for Tuesday, September 28th from 5 to 6, in order to be closer to when the fieldwork is expected to begin in early October. And as a reminder, that project will entail the installation of 3 test wells and 11 monitoring wells, and conducting 3 aquifer pump tests at 2 locations in Newark and one location in Fremont, in order to evaluate water quality and suitability of those areas for brackish groundwater removal in the future. So for planning purposes, we'll provide more information and confirm the date as it gets closer to by email to the board, so that you'll have that information. And last but not least, staff wanted to make the board aware that the district has a membership with the California Data Collaborative, or CADC, and district staff and board members are eligible to register for their annual California Water Data Summit on Thursday, August 19th for free. So the summit is an all-day virtual event that provides opportunities for water agencies to interact and engage with new ideas and approaches to managing and using water data, something close to our hearts here at the district. I will be following up with an email to the board with information on how to sign up if you're interested. And with that, that concludes all my flurry of updates, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have a couple of comments.
Yeah, go ahead, Director Seppi.
So if you take a look at our water production report and demand for water right now, we really have not been able to save very much water. And whatever we have saved, the small amount, I attribute more for having a cool summer here, May, June, July. And if you look around the Bay Area, other water districts are experiencing the same thing. I sent out a couple of articles by Paul Rogers last week that show that Santa Clara Valley Water District customers are not saving anything. They're at the same level of demand as they had back in 2019. In fact, 13 cities are using more water than they were in 2019, including all of the wealthiest cities on the other side of the bay. And so we have a Bay Area wide problem where people are not getting the message right now. And I believe, this is my own opinion, that the messaging is not going out as strongly as it did under Governor Brown. And so maybe the water districts have cried wolf too many times and people are just not taking it seriously. But when you see Oroville down to 25% of its capacity, it starts to get really scary, and we're down to 5% allocation, which in quite a number of the Aqua Water Management Committee meetings that we've had, they're indicating that it will go down to 0 if the situation doesn't change early this winter. So I would, as I mentioned in our LICA committee meeting, I would encourage the staff to work with other Bay Area water districts for putting out general PSAs that can get out on all the broadcast networks, radio networks. We need the Department of Transportation to start putting up drought messaging on all the highway signs like we were doing last time around. There needs to be a broader coverage of what we're going through. And for some reason, throughout the entire Bay Area, the message is not getting through. I want to compliment the staff on everything that they have been putting out. It's excellent work. And I think we're doing a better job than most districts, but it's not showing up in the results of our monthly water demand. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, so unless there are other questions, I actually have a related final GM report, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, there are going to be a couple of upcoming town halls on the droughts. There'll be, and ACWD will be participating. So State Assembly Member Alex Lee will be hosting a Conserve and Preserve Drought Town Hall next Wednesday, August 18, at 4 p.m. And that will be a panel, a discussion, including ACWD, DWR, BOSCA, and Valley Water. And we'll all be messaging about the current conditions in the state, in our local agencies, and also providing information to participants as to how they can conserve water and various programs available, including at ACWD. So that'll be a good discussion. And there'll be another similar discussion. This is by Alameda County Supervisor David Halbert, who will be hosting Local Water Experts Answer Your Drought Questions town hall on Wednesday, August 25th at 6 p.m. And that again will include ACWD, Zone 7 Water Agency, DSRSD, the City of Livermore, and Cal Water. So the board received an email earlier from our Public Affairs Supervisor, Shireen Gonzalez, on these two town halls with some more information and a link. But we'll be working together with the supervisor's office and also Assembly Member Alex Lee's office to more broadly advertise both of these events. We're working with the Tri-City Voice on that right now, and some other outlets, including social media. And with regard to representation by ACWD, both President Akbari and I are coordinating in terms of who is doing what specifically, but we intend to ensure that ACWD is well represented in those town halls. So with that, that completes our general manager's reports this evening.
Quick question, if I might, on the town halls and other meetings. If we have more than 3 board members in attendance, do we need to post a meeting?
I believe the answer is no if you're participating as an attendee, but I will punt that to our general counsel to confirm.
Yep, you're correct, General Manager. These are public forums. They're provided by other public agencies. And so if 3 directors participate, you don't have to agendize it. The directors can only participate as part of that public discussion, and you may not talk amongst yourself about ACWD business. So those are the ground rules.
Of course. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Are there any other questions or comments on any of our GM reports? Hearing none, we will move on to directors' comments, reports on meetings attended, and agenda item requests. And I see that item 7.1 is both directors Gunther and Sethi. So maybe we can start with one of you guys.
Yes, I could go ahead and start on the CARB one. It was primarily the whole thing really reflected on the Air Resources Board requirements of going to electric vehicles for all of our equipment, including our large trucks. I think the 2 districts that were involved, agencies involved, presented their case well as to what the problems are. We're trying to just go electric, and that, you know, big equipment, you take it out into the field, it stays out there for multiple times, it has long ranges. It's just not there. The manufacturers aren't there. My concern is I don't think CARB's listening. The environmental movement is not listening. They're just saying, well, it'll happen. The industry is going to rise to the occasion. It's something we need to watch. I think, you know, there was a PG&E member talking about infrastructure availability, but, you know, it seemed to me, I don't know, Paul, if you saw this, but I kind of came away with the impression that, you know, that's if you're a disadvantaged agency. So I wasn't thrilled with what I heard or saw. I've never really been thrilled with the Air Board since my days in the Coast Guard dealing with them. They don't, you know, engineering based is not their reality. And they believe that the engineering will rise and meet their demands. You know, I find it fascinating that we have people trying to put tourists in space, and yet we're trying to eliminate diesel engines from trucks that we rely on for fire service, for water service during fire service. But it's okay for two yahoos to go fly up into space with nothing to show a benefit. I'm just fascinated by that. I'm frustrated by that. And well, I've said my piece.
I think Director Gunther summarized it really well. Let me just make 2 points. One, the staff does need to follow this as it's evolving. We're not as impacted as some of the presenters in the recent presentations we've heard, especially the water and fire districts that are up in the Sierra foothills and Lake Tahoe and all over the fire regions. And they're most affected with medium and very heavy equipment. For us, we have a little bit less exposure right now, but as we move through the rest of the decade, certainly we need to pay attention, especially on our medium and heavy equipment. Number two, I did find it interesting that the PG&E return on investment calculator that they have, and that's something to be aware of. On if you're going to replace a vehicle or set of vehicles, they have a return on investment tool that they can help a district out with, or any other type of agency. So that's all I'll add. I do want to make a couple other comments. First, the achievement of excellence on procurement. I think we all as a board need to thank this procurement staff, and I am really impressed to hear that they did the internal and external surveying to find out where to make improvements. That by itself is really outstanding. And so I want to recognize them for that. Number two, I'd like to inform the board that Director Weed and I will be attending the California Special Districts Association conference down in Monterey at the end of the month. And I just learned that we are a recipient of a renewal on our certificate of transparency. So Director Weed and I will accept that on behalf of the district. That's kind of cool. And then the third thing I wanted to mention, which goes back to our discussion on LVE, was I just want to say, trying to look at solutions on Lake Del Valle is not mutually exclusive with participating in the LVE project. And I did, under director's comments a meeting or two ago, suggest that we complete the study that we had started a few years back to look at all of the options on Lake Del Valle. And I'm hoping we will move forward on that, and that we will be able to have a good board discussion. And if it turns out that there's some worthwhile solutions pursuing, you know, then it's at that point you get your, you know, all the agencies that have an interest together and have a working group that can take a serious look at this. But you can't do it without having a completed study first. So, you know, I will encourage the board from time to time, let's get that done. And hopefully, you know, we may come up with multiple storage supply options down the road.
And, you know, as much as a negative I said earlier, I do support that concept and looking into it. It's a resource that's out there. And I do believe that we should have talks and discussions as to how can we make that resource maybe beneficial. We are in a drought and we should be doing that. So yes, I agree with Director Sethi on that.
Same here.
Those are all my comments for this meeting.
All right. Yes, John Weed, thank you. Amen to Director Sethi's comments there. I think if we get into that, we'll find an extraordinary opportunity to get a nominal cost. I did attend a meeting yesterday that staff had at the end of George Court in Newark. Excellent community turnout and response. And it's interesting to see the character of a community in these older neighborhoods, particularly in Newark, where you do get significant response by the people and interest in what's taking place, as well as the city staff was there and for the city of Newark, also coordinating. Next, I have an opportunity to attend the Smart Water Summit in near Jacksonville, Florida on September 19th to the 22nd. That is funded by water vendors. I attended one several years ago at Scottsdale. It's 3 days of one vendor after another coming through and giving a presentation of their products and spending time talking to other water professionals on what is being proposed. Expenses are covered for those invited or who have applied and been invited. That could include staff or board members. Not many board members to attend. And it's at no cost to the district. I would hope that the board would authorize that as being water related duty on the part of a board member. So thank you.
Great. Any other comments from directors? Hearing none, I think we can conclude item 7. And given that we have no closed session today, which feels odd, I will adjourn tonight's meeting at 9:46. Thank you, everybody.
You're getting better.
Hey, my
Thank
prediction is
you.
off by 46 minutes.